4 years ago, Ilara Wynne vanished on what should have been the happiest night of her life, leaving behind a newborn son and a devastated man who loved her. The town whispered she was a coward, a runaway bride who abandoned her family. But the truth was far more sinister. She'd been drugged, kidnapped, and buried alive in a private asylum by the very people who should have protected her. Now she's back, and she's come to reclaim everything that was stolen. Stay until the end to see how her fight for freedom unfolds, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The train's whistle cut through the frozen morning air like a knife through bone. Ilara Wynne pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watching the landscape blur into shades of gray and white. 4 years. 4 years of locked doors and screaming into pillows. 4 years of being told she was crazy, broken, unfit. 4 years of clawing at walls and dreaming of a child's face she'd only held for 3 precious hours before they ripped him from her arms. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the torn photograph hidden in her coat pocket, a picture she'd stolen from her father's study the night she finally escaped. In it, a dark-haired man held a baby bundled in blue. Cade Mercer. Her Cade. And Finn. Her son. The wedding dress she wore beneath her threadbare coat was ruined, yellowed with age, torn at the hem, stained with 4 years of desperation. She'd kept it all this time, a talisman, a promise to herself that one day she'd finish what they'd started. One day she'd walk down an aisle that wasn't lined with nurses and locked doors. Briar Ridge, next stop, Briar Ridge. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The conductor's voice felt like both salvation and sentencing. When the train lurched to a stop, Ilara stood on shaking legs. Through the window, she could see the platform, the same weathered boards where Cade had kissed her goodbye 4 years and a lifetime ago, promising to have everything ready for their wedding night. She'd been so young then, so naive, believing that love could protect her from her father's greed and her uncle's cruelty. She'd learned differently. The platform was nearly empty in the early morning cold, a few ranch hands loading supplies, an older woman with a basket of bread, and then her breath stopped. There, at the far end of the platform, was a man in a heavy coat, his Stetson pulled low against the wind. Even from a distance, even after 4 years, she knew the set of those shoulders, the way he stood with his weight slightly to the left from an old riding injury, and beside him, holding his hand, was a small boy with dark curls. Ilara's legs moved before her mind caught up. She stepped off the train, her worn boots hitting the platform with a hollow thud. The morning wind cut through her thin coat, but she barely felt it. All she could see was that child, her child, pointing at something in the distance while Cade nodded absently, his attention on the supply wagon being loaded nearby. She took one step forward, then another. The world narrowed to a tunnel, and at the end of it was everything she'd lost. "Finn," she whispered, though no sound came out. The boy turned first. His eyes, Cade's eyes, dark and searching, landed on her with the innocent curiosity of a 4-year-old encountering a stranger. He tugged on Cade's sleeve. "Papa, there's a lady." Cade glanced up distractedly. "Don't bother folks, son. Come on, we need to—" His words died in his throat. For a moment, Ilara saw everything she'd been terrified of seeing cross his face. Shock, disbelief, and then, like storm clouds rolling over the mountains, rage. "No!" His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the wind. "No, you're not. You can't be—" "Cade." Her voice broke on his name. 4 years of holding it behind her teeth, of whispering it into the dark of her cell, of screaming it when the medicine made her forget who she was. He moved fast, faster than she remembered. In 3 strides he was in front of her, his hand gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. Finn made a small sound of confusion, but Cade didn't look away from her face. "What kind of sick game is this?" His words were low, dangerous. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I came back," Ilara said, tears already streaming down her face. "I came back for him. For you. I never left, Cade. I swear I never—" "You left." His grip tightened. "You walked out 3 hours after giving birth. You left our son crying in his crib, and you disappeared into the night like you'd never existed. Don't you dare stand here and tell me—" "Papa?" Finn's small voice cut through the tension. "Papa, you're hurting the lady." Cade released her arm like it burned him. He stepped back, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with something between fury and anguish. Get on the next train out of here. I don't know what you want, but you're not getting it. You're not—" His voice cracked. "You're not doing this to him. To us. Not again." "I was taken." The words tumbled out desperately. "That night, after the wedding, my father, he sent men. They drugged me, Cade. They took me to a place, a hospital, but it wasn't a hospital. It was—" She was shaking so hard now she could barely stand. "They kept me there. 4 years. I tried to escape. I tried to send word, but he paid them. He paid everyone, and no one would believe me. Enough." Cade's voice was like iron. "I looked for you. For weeks I looked. Your father said you'd run off, that you'd never wanted the baby, never wanted this life. He showed me the note." "What note?" "I never wrote any—" "The one in your handwriting that said you couldn't do it, that you were too young, too scared, that you needed to get away." His jaw clenched. "He had witnesses. Your cousin saw you packing. The stable boy saw you ride out toward the Eastern Pass." "They lied!" Ilara's voice rose, drawing stares from the few people on the platform. "All of them lied. My father paid them to lie because he—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Because he'd already arranged for me to marry someone else. Someone with money, with connections. A man named Victor Hale." She watched something flicker in Cade's eyes at the name. Recognition? Fear? "Victor Hale is a railroad tycoon," Cade said slowly. "He's 60 years old." "He's 63, Ilara corrected, her voice hollow. "And I was his 4th wife. The ceremony was held in the asylum chapel 2 months after they took me. I fought. I screamed. They said I was hysterical, delusional. They held me down and—" Her voice broke completely. "The marriage was legal. My father had me declared mentally incompetent. Victor got a young wife. My father got business contracts and political favors, and I got locked in a room with bars on the windows." Cade was staring at her like she was a ghost, and maybe she was. Maybe the girl he'd loved had died in that asylum, and this hollow shell was all that remained. "Papa, why is the lady crying?" Finn asked, pressing against Cade's leg. Cade seemed to remember suddenly where they were. He scooped Finn up, settling him on his hip, creating a physical barrier between the child and Ilara. "Go back to the train," he said to her, his voice empty now, drained of anger. "There's nothing for you here." "There's everything for me here," Ilara whispered. "He's everything." She took a step closer, and Cade moved back. But Finn, curious as any 4-year-old, peered at her over his father's shoulder. "You have pretty eyes," the boy said solemnly. "Like the sky when it's really, really blue." Ilara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times in her cell, seeing her son, hearing his voice, knowing he was alive and safe, but she'd never imagined it would hurt this much, like her heart was being torn out through her ribs. "Thank you," she managed. "You have beautiful eyes too, just like your papa's." Finn smiled at that, but Cade's expression hardened further. "Don't," he warned. "Don't talk to him. I'm his mother. You're a stranger who abandoned him." Cade's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it worse. "Whatever you think happened, whatever story you've told yourself to make it easier, it doesn't change what you did. You left us." "I would never—" Ilara started, but Cade was already turning away. "Papa, wait!" Finn called out, still looking at Ilara. "The lady needs help. She's cold." And he was right. In her desperation to get off the train to see them, Ilara hadn't noticed how violently she was shivering. The thin coat did nothing against the Wyoming winter wind, and the wedding dress beneath it was practically threadbare. Cade stopped. She watched the war on his face, the anger fighting against something else, something that looked like the man who'd once promised to protect her from anything. "Where are you staying, Wes?" he asked without turning around. I don't know. I just got off the train. Do you have money?" Shame burned in her cheeks. "No." "Food?" "No." A long silence, then, "The boarding house on Main Street. Mrs. Kowalski runs it. Tell her I sent you. Tell her—" He paused. "Tell her to put it on my account." "Kate, that's all you're getting from me," he cut her off. "A warm bed for a night or two while you figure out where you're really going. But stay away from my son. Stay away from my ranch. And then leave Briar Ridge the same way you left it before." He walked away before she could respond. Finn waving at her cheerfully over his shoulder until they disappeared around the corner of the station house. Alara stood alone on the platform as the train pulled away, taking with it her last easy escape. The few remaining townspeople were staring now, whispering. She recognized some of them: Mrs. Chen from the general store, Thomas Wright, who worked at the blacksmith's. They'd been at her wedding 4 years ago, or what was supposed to be her wedding. They'd also been at Finn's christening 3 days after she disappeared, she realized. They'd watched Cade raise their son alone. They'd heard whatever story her father had spread about the runaway bride. She was the villain in their story. Pulling her coat tighter, Alara walked into town, following the dirt road that had once been so familiar. Briar Ridge hadn't changed much. Same cluster of buildings along Main Street, the general store, the saloon, the church with its white steeple, the small bank, the doctor's office. But everything felt different through the lens of 4 lost years. Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house sat at the far end of town, a 2-story structure with a sagging porch and cheerful yellow shutters. Alara climbed the steps, her legs heavy with exhaustion that went bone deep. The woman who answered her knock was small and round, with steel gray hair pinned in a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Kowalski?" Alara's voice sounded thin in her own ears. "Cade Mercer sent me. He said—" "I know what he said." The older woman's gaze traveled from Alara's tangled hair to her worn boots, lingering on the lace visible beneath her coat hem. "You're her, the one who came back." Word traveled fast in small towns. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Kowalski studied her for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Room 3, top of the stairs. There's a bath down the hall. Water's warm if you need it." "Thank you." Alara's throat was tight. "I can't pay you, not yet, but I'll find work. Cade Mercer's credit is good here," Mrs. Kowalski said firmly. "Though, if you're looking to make trouble for that man and his boy, you can turn right back around." "I'm not here to make trouble," Alara said quietly. "I'm here to tell the truth." "Truth," the landlady snorted. "Everyone's got their own version of that. Question is whether anyone will believe yours." The room was small but clean. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand, a single window overlooking Main Street. Alara sank onto the bed, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she'd been fighting since her escape 3 days ago. She'd waited until Victor Hale left on business, waited until the night nurses were distracted. She'd broken her window with a stolen candlestick, climbed down a trellis in the dark, and run. She'd stolen clothes from a washing line, hitched rides on supply wagons, and finally scraped together enough for a train ticket by selling the only thing of value she'd managed to keep hidden, her mother's locket. And now she was here, in a town that hated her, with a man who wouldn't look at her, and a son who didn't know her. But she was here. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window watching the town settle into darkness. Lamplight glowed in windows. Somewhere a dog barked, and in the distance she could see the lights of Cade's ranch, the home they were supposed to share. A knock on her door made her jump. "It's me," Mrs. Kowalski's voice called. "I've got soup." Alara opened the door to find the landlady holding a tray with a steaming bowl and fresh bread. "You look half-starved," Mrs. Kowalski said, pushing past her into the room. "Eat." "Thank you," Alara whispered, but the older woman waved her off. "Don't thank me yet. I'm not doing this out of kindness." She settled into the room's only chair with a grunt. "I'm doing it because I want to hear your side. The whole town's already convicted you based on gossip and your daddy's lies. Figure you deserve a fair hearing from at least one person." Alara sat on the bed, the bowl warm in her hands. "Why would you believe me when no one else does?" "Because I knew your mother," Mrs. Kowalski said simply. "Caroline Wynne was the kindest woman in 3 counties. And I saw what that bastard of a father did to her, slowly breaking her spirit until there was nothing left. When she died, I swore I'd watch out for you if I could." Her eyes hardened. "I failed at that. Maybe I can make up for it now." Something broke loose in Alara's chest, a knot of grief and hope she'd been holding so tight it had become part of her. "He told everyone I ran away," she said, her voice cracking. "But I didn't. Mrs. Kowalski, I swear I didn't. Start from the beginning, the older woman said, and don't leave anything out. So Alara told her. Everything. The whirlwind courtship with Cade, defying her father's orders to stay away from a worthless rancher, the secret pregnancy, the hurried wedding plans when her father found out, his cold rage when she refused to terminate the situation, the wedding day itself, beautiful and terrifying, knowing her father was out there somewhere, plotting. He came to my room that night, Alara said, staring at the soup she couldn't bring herself to eat. After the reception, after Cade and I, she swallowed hard. I was feeding Finn for the first time. My father brought two men with him. They grabbed me, and when I screamed, they put a cloth over my face. Something sweet-smelling. I tried to fight, but everything went dark. Mrs. Kowalski's jaw was tight, but she nodded for Alara to continue. When I woke up, I was in a carriage heading east. My father was there. He told me I'd been foolish, that I'd embarrassed him, but he'd fixed it. He'd arranged a better marriage. To Victor Hale. Alara's hand shook around the bowl. I told him I was already married. He said that was being handled, that Cade would get a letter in my handwriting explaining I'd changed my mind, that witnesses would confirm I'd run away. The note, Mrs. Kowalski said quietly. I never wrote it, but my father, he was always good at forgery, and he had my diary, pages of my handwriting to copy. Alara set the bowl aside, unable to eat. The asylum was called Westbrook Haven. It was in Maryland, far from anyone who knew me. They admitted me under my father's authority, said I was suffering from postpartum hysteria, delusions, that I was a danger to myself. And the marriage to Hale? Happened 2 months later in the asylum chapel. I fought, I screamed. The doctor said it proved I was unstable. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They gave me medicine after that. Things that made me forget my own name sometimes, made the days blur together, made me... She stopped, unable to voice the worst of it. The treatments, the isolation cells, the times she'd been so broken she'd almost believed them when they said she was crazy. How did you get out? Mrs. Kowalski asked. Victor wasn't as careful as my father. He liked to show me off sometimes, take me to parties as his delicate wife who needed constant supervision. 3 days ago, he left on business. The night staff was new, distracted. I broke my window and ran. She looked up, meeting the older woman's eyes. I didn't even know if Cade and Finn were still here, but I had to try. Mrs. Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, her expression grim. That's a hell of a story. It's the truth. I believe you, the landlady said firmly. Question is how to make anyone else believe you. Your father's a powerful man, this Hale fellow even more so. And Cade Mercer, she sighed, that man loved you something fierce. When you disappeared, it nearly destroyed him. Took him months just to function enough to care for the baby. He's not going to want to believe you because believing you means accepting he gave up on you, means accepting he let you suffer while he convinced himself you'd abandoned him. Alara felt tears spill over. I don't know what to do. How to prove it. You can't prove something like that with words, Mrs. Kowalski said. You have to prove it with time, with actions. You have to show him who you really are. Make him remember why he loved you in the first place. He won't even let me near Finn. Then you'll have to change his mind. The older woman moved toward the door, then paused. There's a church social tomorrow evening. Cade usually brings the boy. You should come. I don't think... Sometimes the best way to tell your story is to let people see you living it, Mrs. Kowalski interrupted. Let them see you're not running. Let them see you fighting. It won't be easy. This town can be cruel to those it's decided to shun, but your mother never backed down from a challenge, and I'm betting you've got her backbone somewhere under all that hurt. After she left, Alara sat in the dark and thought about backbone, about strength, about the 4 years she'd survived in that place, holding on to sanity by a thread made of memories. Cade's laugh, the weight of her newborn son in her arms, the smell of sage and horses on the Wyoming wind. She'd survived hell. She could survive Briar Ridge's judgment. The next morning, Alara went looking for work. She started at the general store, but Mrs. Chen took one look at her and said there were no positions available. The saloon owner laughed in her face. The blacksmith actually spat at her feet. "We don't hire women who abandon their babies," he said coldly. By noon, she'd been rejected by every business in town. She was standing outside the church, trying to gather the courage to ask Pastor Williams for help, when she heard a child's laughter. She turned and saw Finn playing in the yard beside the church, building something with sticks, while an older woman, the pastor's wife, Ilara thought, watched from the porch. Before she could think better of it, Ilara moved closer. Finn looked up as her shadow fell across his stick construction. "It's the pretty lady," he announced cheerfully. "Papa said you went away." "Not yet," Ilara said, kneeling down to his level. Her heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. "What are you building?" "A ranch," Finn said seriously. "Like Papa's. See, this is the barn, and this is where the horses sleep, and this—" He held up a particularly impressive stick. "This is the big house where me and Papa live." "It's wonderful," Ilara said softly. Up close, she could see all the details she'd missed before. The dimple in his left cheek, the way his hair curled just like hers did, the small scar on his chin. "You're very talented." "I'm going to be a rancher like Papa when I grow up," Finn said proudly. Then his expression turned thoughtful. "Are you the lady who was Papa's friend before I was born?" Ilara's throat closed. Friend. Was that what Cade had told him? "Yes," she managed. "I was your Papa's friend." "Why did you leave?" Finn asked with the blunt honesty of a child. "Papa gets sad sometimes when Mrs. Chen mentions you. I don't like when Papa's sad." I didn't want to leave," Ilara said, tears blurring her vision. "I wanted to stay with your Papa more than anything, but sometimes bad things happen that we can't control." "Did somebody hurt you?" Finn's eyes were wide, concerned. "Yes," she whispered, "but I'm okay now. I'm back, and I'm going to make sure Finn!" The pastor's wife was hurrying down the steps, her face pinched with disapproval. "Come away from there, child. Your father wouldn't want—" "But Mrs. Williams, she's nice. She likes my ranch." "Finn, come here now." The boy obeyed reluctantly, casting confused glances back at Ilara. Mrs. Williams put a protective arm around him, her gaze cold as it landed on Ilara. "You have some nerve," she said quietly. "Approaching that child after what you did." "I was just talking to him," Ilara said, forcing herself to stand tall. "I meant no harm." "You've done enough harm to last a lifetime," Mrs. Williams said. "That boy cried for his mother every night for months. Do you have any idea what that did to Cade? What it did to all of us who had to watch?" Ilara wanted to scream that she'd cried for her son too, in a locked room where no one could hear, that she'd beaten her fists bloody against asylum walls, begging to be allowed to go home. But she just stood there, taking the verbal lashing, because what else could she do? "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I'm so sorry for all of it, but I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until what? You destroy what little peace that man has managed to build?" Mrs. Williams shook her head. "Do everyone a favor and get back on the train, Miss Wynne, or whatever your name is now." That night at the church social, Ilara almost didn't go. She stood outside Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house in the only decent dress her landlady had been able to find, a simple gray wool that was 3 sizes too big, and questioned every decision that had brought her to this moment. But then she remembered Finn's face, his laugh, the way he'd called her pretty. She remembered the feel of him in her arms for those 3 precious hours before they took him. And she walked to the church. The social hall was warm and bright, filled with families and food and laughter. The moment Ilara walked in, the laughter stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned to her. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to flee, to protect herself from the judgment she saw on every face. Instead, she lifted her chin and walked further into the room. "Ilara Wynne," Pastor Williams said, approaching her with the careful diplomacy of a man used to mediating conflicts. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm a member of this community," Ilara said quietly. "Or I was. I'd like to be again." "That's complicated," the pastor said carefully. "Given the circumstances." "Given the circumstances, I think it's time people heard my side," Ilara replied. A stir ran through the crowd. She could feel them pressing closer, eager for drama. And then Cade walked in with Finn, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He saw her immediately. His whole body went rigid, his hand tightening on Finn's shoulder. For a moment, Alara thought he might just turn around and leave, but Finn spotted her first. "Papa, look! It's the pretty lady, the one I was telling you about." Every eye swiveled between Alara and Cade, waiting to see what would happen next. Cade's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and dangerous. "We need to talk. Outside. Now." The cold night air hit Alara's face like a slap as Cade gripped her elbow and steered her out of the church hall. Behind them, she could hear the immediate explosion of whispers and speculation, but Cade didn't stop until they were around the side of the building, away from prying eyes and eager ears. He released her arm and stepped back, putting distance between them like she was something dangerous. In the moonlight, his face was all hard angles and shadows, but she could see the fury trembling just beneath the surface. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was low, controlled, which somehow made it worse than if he'd shouted. "Talking to my son? Coming to a church social like you have any right to be here?" "I have every right," Alara said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "This is my home too, or it was supposed to be." "Your home?" Cade laughed, a bitter sound that cut through the night. "You gave up any claim to that when you walked away. And now you show up out of nowhere spinning some insane story about asylums and forced marriages, expecting what? That I'll just believe you? That I'll let you waltz back into our lives like nothing happened?" "It's not a story, Cade. It's the truth." "The truth," he repeated, shaking his head. "You want to talk about truth? The truth is, I waited for you. I sat up every night for weeks thinking you'd come back, that there'd been some mistake. I made excuses for you to everyone who asked. I defended you to your own father when he said you were unstable, that you'd always been flighty and irresponsible." Alara flinched. "My father said that?" "He said a lot of things. He showed me your diary entries about feeling trapped. He showed me the note you left. He brought witnesses who saw you packing, saw you ride out." Cade's voice cracked. "What was I supposed to think?" "That I loved you," Alara said desperately. "That I would never leave our son. Didn't you know me at all? Didn't you—" "I thought I knew you." Cade cut her off. "I thought I knew every part of you. But people lie, Alara. People pretend. Maybe you were a better actress than I gave you credit for." The accusation hit her like a physical blow. "You think I was acting when I said I loved you, when I carried your child, when I married you?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Cade's control finally snapped. "You show up after 4 years wearing a wedding dress like some kind of ghost, and you expect me to just accept that you were locked away all this time? If that's true, where's your proof? Where's any evidence of this asylum, of this forced marriage?" "Victor Hale," Alara said quickly. "Look him up. You said yourself he's a railroad tycoon. The marriage is documented. The asylum was called Westbrook Haven in Maryland. My father paid them. There must be records, receipts, something. Your father is a respected businessman. Victor Hale is one of the most powerful men west of the Mississippi." Cade's voice was hollow now. "Even if any part of your story is true, do you really think you can fight men like that? Do you think I can?" "I'm not asking you to fight them," Alara said. "I'm just asking you to believe me, to give me a chance to prove it." "A chance?" Cade laughed again, that same bitter sound. "You had a chance. You had a life here, with me, with our son. You had everything we dreamed about, and somehow I'm supposed to believe you didn't choose to throw it all away?" "I was drugged and kidnapped from our bed." Alara's voice rose, frustration and pain making her reckless. "I was locked in a room and forced to marry a man 3 times my age. I spent 4 years being told I was crazy, being medicated into compliance, being treated like I was less than human. And you want to stand there and tell me I chose that?" The door to the church hall opened, spilling light and the sound of voices. Pastor Williams appeared, concern etched on his face. "Is everything all right out here? We heard shouting." "Everything's fine," Cade said tightly, not taking his eyes off Alara. "We're just finishing our conversation." "Actually," Alara said, her voice steadier now, "I think we're just beginning it." She pushed past both men and walked back into the church hall. Every eye was on her again, but this time she didn't let herself falter. She walked to the center of the room and stood there, waiting until the whispers died down. "I know what you all think of me," she said into the silence. "I know what you've been told, that I abandoned my child, that I ran away from my responsibilities, that I was selfish and cowardly and cruel." No one spoke. Even Finn, sitting on a bench with Mrs. Williams, was staring at her with wide, curious eyes. "But that's not what happened," Alara continued. 4 years ago, on what should have been the happiest night of my life, I was taken from this town against my will. I was drugged, kidnapped, and locked away in an asylum. My father had me declared mentally incompetent and married me off to a man I'd never met. I've spent 4 years trying to get back here, back to my son, back to the man I loved. Her voice broke, but she pushed through. "I'm not asking you to believe me right away. I'm not asking for your forgiveness or your acceptance. I'm just asking for a chance to prove who I really am." The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound from the back of the room. "That's quite a tale," Thomas Wright said, stepping forward. "Awful convenient, isn't it? Showing up years later with a story that makes you the victim?" "It's the truth," Alara said firmly. "Truth?" Mrs. Chen spoke up, her voice sharp. "The truth is, we all saw how anxious you were before the wedding, how you kept looking toward the door like you wanted to run. Don't think we didn't notice." "I was nervous," Alara admitted. "My father was angry about the marriage. I knew he'd try something, but that doesn't mean—" "It means you had doubts," another voice called out. "Maybe you did run. Maybe you got scared and took off, and now you're back because you need something." "What would I need?" Alara demanded. "I have nothing. I am nothing. I came back because this is where I belong, with my family." "They're not your family anymore," Thomas said coldly. "Cade raised that boy alone. He's been both mother and father to him. You're just a stranger who happens to share some blood." Alara felt the words like knives, but she refused to look away. "I know Cade has been an amazing father. I know Finn is safe and loved, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm his mother, that I never stopped being his mother, even when I was locked away, even when—" "Enough." Cade's voice cut through the room. He'd come back inside, and now he stood near the door, his face carefully blank. "That's enough. Finn doesn't need to hear this." Alara looked at her son, who was indeed watching the whole scene with confused, worried eyes. Her heart clenched. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." She walked toward the door, expecting Cade to stop her, to say something, anything. But he just watched her go, his expression unreadable. Outside, the cold felt even more bitter than before. Alara made it halfway back to the boarding house before the tears came, hot and angry and helpless. She'd thought if she just told them, if she just explained, someone would believe her. Someone would see the truth. But truth didn't matter when the lies were more convenient. She was so lost in her misery that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a hand touched her shoulder. She spun around, heart racing, half expecting one of the angry townspeople. Instead, it was Mrs. Kowalski, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her face stern but not unkind. "That was brave," the older woman said. "Stupid, but brave." "It didn't help," Alara said bitterly. "They still hate me." "They're scared," Mrs. Kowalski corrected. "You're asking them to believe something that would mean they've been wrong for 4 years, that they've been cruel to a victim instead of rightfully shunning someone who deserved it. People don't like being wrong. Makes them defensive." "So what am I supposed to do? How do I prove it?" "You don't," Mrs. Kowalski said firmly. "Not with words. You prove it by being here, by not running when things get hard, by showing them every single day that you're not the person they think you are." She paused. "And you start by talking to Cade, really talking to him, not in front of the whole town, not in anger. You need to make him hear you." "He won't listen. He's made up his mind." "He's hurt and scared," Mrs. Kowalski said. "There's a difference. That man loved you with everything he had. When you disappeared, it broke something in him. If there's even a chance you're telling the truth, he has to face that he gave up on you, that he believed the lies. That's a heavy burden." Alara wiped her eyes. "So what do I do?" "You fight," Mrs. Kowalski said simply. "Not with fists or anger, but with persistence, with truth, with love. She pulled her shawl tighter. And you start tomorrow morning. Cade's ranch needs help. He's been doing everything himself since his ranch hand left last month. You show up at dawn and offer to work. He'll turn me away. Probably, Mrs. Kowalski agreed. The first day. Maybe the second. But you keep showing up. You prove you're serious. You prove you're not running. She turned to head back to the boarding house. Your mother would have done the same. She never backed down from a challenge, no matter how hard it got. That night, Alara lay awake planning what she'd say, how she'd convince Cade to let her help. But when dawn came and she stood at the gate to his ranch, all her practiced words fled. The Mercer Ranch was exactly as she remembered, a sprawling property with rolling pastures, a large barn, corrals for the horses, and the main house sitting on a small rise. She'd been here so many times before, back when Cade was courting her, back when they dreamed about their future together. The front door opened and Cade stepped out, already dressed for the day's work. He froze when he saw her standing there. What are you doing here? His voice was flat, exhausted. I came to help, Alara said. Mrs. Kowalski said you need ranch hands. I can work. You? Cade's eyebrow rose. You grew up in a mansion with servants. You've never worked a day in your life. That's not true. I helped in the kitchen. This isn't arranging flowers or organizing tea parties, Cade interrupted. This is hard physical labor, mucking stalls, hauling hay, mending fences. You wouldn't last an hour. Try me, Alara said, lifting her chin. Give me 1 week. Let me prove I can do this. Let me prove I'm not the person you think I am. Cade stared at her for a long moment. She could see the war on his face, the part of him that wanted to slam the door against the part that remembered who she used to be. 1 week, he finally said. You work dawn to dusk. You do exactly what I tell you. You stay away from Finn unless I say otherwise. And at the end of the week, you leave. No arguments, no excuses. You get on a train and you don't come back. It was a terrible deal. A week to change 4 years of hurt and anger. But it was more than she'd had yesterday. Deal, Alara said. You start now, Cade said. The horses need feeding, the stalls need mucking, and there's a fence in the east pasture that needs mending. I'll show you where everything is once. After that, you're on your own. The next hour was a blur of instructions and locations. Cade showed her the feed room, the tools, the pastures, speaking in short, clipped sentences like he couldn't bear to spend more time with her than necessary. Then he left her in the barn with a pitchfork and walked away. Alara looked at the row of stalls, at the mountains of soiled hay that needed removing, and felt despair wash over her. She'd never done anything like this. In her father's house, she'd had servants. At the asylum, she'd been kept in her room except for supervised exercises and meals. But she'd survived 4 years in hell. She could survive this. She drove the pitchfork into the first pile of dirty hay and began to work. By noon, her hands were blistered and bleeding. Her back screamed with every movement. Her dress, the only one she owned besides the ruined wedding gown, was filthy beyond recognition. But she'd cleaned 4 stalls. She was starting on the 5th when she heard small footsteps behind her. You're still here. Alara turned to find Finn standing in the barn doorway, holding a sandwich wrapped in cloth. I'm still here, she confirmed, trying to smile through her exhaustion. Papa said you'd probably give up, Finn said, walking closer. He said ladies like you don't do this kind of work. Ladies like me? Alara repeated carefully. Pretty ladies, Finn said matter-of-factly. Ladies who wear nice dresses and smell good. You smell like horses now. Despite everything, Alara laughed. I suppose I do. Finn held out the sandwich. Mrs. Kowalski sent this. She said you'd need food if you were going to keep working. Alara's eyes stung with sudden tears. That was kind of her. Are you crying? Finn asked, concerned. Did you hurt yourself? No, sweetie, I'm fine. These are happy tears. There are happy tears? Finn looked fascinated. Papa has sad tears sometimes. At night when he thinks I'm sleeping, but I've never seen happy ones. Alara's heart broke a little more. Your papa cries? Sometimes, Finn said quietly. He looks at pictures and gets really quiet and sad. Pictures of a pretty lady. Is that you? Yes, Alara whispered. That's me. Why did you make him sad? The question was innocent, curious, without accusation. I didn't mean to, Alara said. Sometimes bad things happen that we can't control. But I'm here now, and I'm going to try very hard to make things better. Finn! Cade's voice came from outside, sharp with concern. Where are you? In the barn, Papa, Finn called back. Cade appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening when he saw Finn talking to Alara. I told you to stay away from him, he said coldly. He came to me, Alara said. I don't care, Finn. Come here, now. The boy obeyed, but he looked back at Alara with a confused, sad expression that made her want to scream at the unfairness of it all. Back to work, Cade told her. You've got 3 more stalls before you can move to the fences. He walked away with Finn, leaving Alara alone again. She ate the sandwich Mrs. Kowalski had sent, every bite tasting like sawdust, and went back to work. The week that followed was the hardest of Alara's life, and that was saying something considering where she'd been. Every morning she showed up at dawn, and every morning Cade gave her a list of tasks that seemed designed to break her. Mucking stalls, hauling 50-pound feed bags, mending miles of fence in the bitter cold, hauling water, chopping wood. Her hands bled and calloused, her back and shoulders screamed. She fell into bed each night so exhausted she couldn't even cry. But she showed up every morning. On the 3rd day, one of the horses, a temperamental mare named Starlight, kicked her in the thigh, leaving a bruise the size of a dinner plate. Alara bit back a scream and kept working. On the 4th day, she fell from a fence she was mending and landed hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. She got up and kept going. On the 5th day, a blizzard rolled in, and Cade told her if she was serious about working, she'd work through it. So she did. She worked through wind that cut like knives and snow that blinded. She worked until her fingers were so numb she couldn't feel them. And when she finally stumbled into the barn for shelter, she found Cade there, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You're insane, he said, coming out in this weather. You told me to work, Alara said through chattering teeth. I didn't think you'd actually do it. He grabbed a blanket from a pile in the corner and threw it at her. You could have died out there. I've survived worse, Alara said, wrapping the blanket around her shaking shoulders. Something flickered across Cade's face. Have you? It was the first time he'd asked anything that suggested he might believe her. Alara met his eyes, seeing the question there, the terrible hope warring with the fear. Yes, she said quietly. I've survived much worse. Before Cade could respond, the barn door flew open and Finn burst in, his eyes wide with fear. Papa! Papa! Something's wrong with Daisy! Cade was moving before Finn finished speaking, Alara forgotten. She followed them to the far stall where Cade's best milk cow was lying on her side, clearly in distress. She's trying to calf, Cade said, his voice tight. But something's wrong. The calf's not positioned right. Should I get the doctor? Finn asked, his voice small and scared. Doc Morrison's in Cheyenne for the week, Cade said grimly. We're on our own. I can help, Alara said. Cade looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You don't know anything about calving. I helped with difficult births at the asylum, Alara said. Human births, yes, but the principle is the same. If the baby's breech or positioned wrong, you have to reach in and turn it, guide it out. That's completely different. It's not that different, Alara interrupted. And unless you have another option, you're going to lose both the cow and the calf. Cade stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp. Tell me what you need. For the next 2 hours, Alara worked with steady hands and quiet instructions, guiding Cade through the process of repositioning the calf. It was hard, bloody work, and several times she thought they'd lost them both. But finally, with one last effort from the exhausted cow, the calf slid free. It wasn't breathing. No, Finn whispered, tears streaming down his face. No, no, no. Alara grabbed the calf, clearing its mouth and nose, rubbing its chest vigorously. Come on, she muttered. Come on, breathe, breathe. Nothing. The small body remained limp. Then Cade was there beside her, his hands joining hers, and together they worked over the calf until finally Finally, it gasped and coughed and drew its first shuddering breath. Finn's cry of joy echoed through the barn. The cow, exhausted but alive, turned her head to nuzzle her newborn. Alara sat back on her heels, covered in blood and fluid, shaking with exhaustion and relief. And when she looked up, Cade was staring at her with an expression she hadn't seen in 4 years. Wonder, recognition. The first crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "Where did you learn that?" he asked quietly. "I told you," Alara said. "At Westbrook Haven. They had a maternity ward. When the doctors realized I had steady hands and a calm temperament, they used me to assist with difficult births." Her voice dropped. "It was the only time I felt useful. The only time I felt like I was saving something instead of losing everything." Cade opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Alara—" "Papa, look," Finn interrupted, pointing at the calf trying to stand on wobbly legs. "He's trying to walk." The moment broke. Cade turned his attention to his son and the animals, but Alara could feel something had shifted between them, something fundamental. That night, as she prepared to leave for the boarding house, Cade stopped her at the gate. "Tomorrow," he said gruffly. "Tomorrow we'll talk, really talk. No interruptions, no audience, just you and me." "Okay," Alara whispered. "I'm not promising anything," Cade added quickly. "I'm not saying I believe you, but after what you did today—" He trailed off. "The woman I loved would have done exactly what you did, thrown herself into helping without thinking about the cost. So maybe I owe it to her memory to at least hear you out." "Her memory?" Alara repeated. "Cade, I'm right here. I'm not a memory. I'm real, and I'm fighting to come back to you." "I know," Cade said, and his voice was raw with emotion. "That's what scares me most." He walked away, leaving Alara standing in the cold dark, hope blooming in her chest for the first time since she'd arrived. The next morning was Sunday, which meant no ranch work. Alara waited at the boarding house, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. When the knock came at mid-morning, she jumped. But it wasn't Cade at the door. It was Mrs. Williams, the pastor's wife, her expression grim. "You need to come with me," she said without preamble. "Now." "What's wrong? Is it Finn? Is Cade—" "They're fine," Mrs. Williams said. "But there are men at the church asking questions about you. Men from back east. They say they're looking for someone." Alara's blood ran cold. "What kind of men?" "The kind that make me nervous," Mrs. Williams said. "I don't know what you've done or what your story really is, but Pastor Williams thought you should know they're here. Thought you might want to make yourself scarce for a while." "I can't run," Alara said, even as fear clawed at her throat. "I can't keep running." "Then at least be smart about how you face whatever's coming," Mrs. Williams said. "Come to the church. Face them there, with witnesses. Don't let them catch you alone." Alara grabbed her coat and followed Mrs. Williams into the street. Her mind was racing. Had Victor sent men to find her? Her father? Both? The church was packed when they arrived, word having spread quickly through the small town. And standing near the altar, looking completely out of place in their fine Eastern clothes, were 2 men who made Alara's stomach drop. She recognized one of them, Dr. Harrison, the head physician at Westbrook Haven, the man who'd supervised her treatments, who told her over and over that she was sick, broken, that she'd never leave. The other was younger, harder, with cold eyes that swept the room and landed on her with predatory satisfaction. "There she is," Dr. Harrison said, his voice carrying that same condescending tone she remembered from the asylum. "Mrs. Hale, we've been so worried about you." "My name is Alara Wynne," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm not Mrs. Hale. That marriage was forced and invalid." "I'm afraid that's the delusion talking," Dr. Harrison said smoothly. "Alara suffers from a severe mental condition that makes her believe—" "I'm not delusional," Alara interrupted. "I was imprisoned in your facility against my will. My father paid you to keep me locked up and medicated." "Imprisoned?" Dr. Harrison looked around at the gathered crowd with an expression of concerned sympathy. "You see? This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that necessitates treatment. Elara was admitted to West Brookhaven by her father after she experienced a severe postpartum breakdown. She became violent, delusional. We've been treating her for 4 years, and she's shown remarkable improvement until she escaped, putting herself and others at risk. That's a lie, Elara said, but she could see doubt flickering on some faces in the crowd. Dr. Harrison was practiced, credible, calm. She was dirty, desperate, alone. Mrs. Hale, the younger man spoke for the first time, pulling papers from his coat. I'm Agent Blackwood, employed by your husband, Mr. Victor Hale. These are legal documents giving him custody of your person due to your mental incapacity. We're here to escort you back to treatment. No, Elara said, backing away. No, you can't do this. I'm not going back there. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Dr. Harrison said, nodding to Blackwood. Your husband has legal authority. She's not going anywhere. Everyone turned. Cade stood in the church doorway, Finn beside him, his expression like thunder. Mr. Mercer, Dr. Harrison said carefully, I understand you have a personal history with Mrs. Hale, but this is a legal matter. She requires psychiatric treatment, and her husband is a 63-year-old man who married a girl 40 years his junior in an asylum chapel, Cade interrupted, walking forward. Yeah, I looked him up. I sent telegrams. Did some digging after what Elara told me. He pulled papers from his own pocket. Victor Hale has been married 4 times. 3 of his previous wives died under mysterious circumstances. He's being investigated for fraud, for coercion, possibly for murder. Alara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Cade had been investigating? He'd been looking into her story? Those are unsubstantiated allegations, Blackwood said coldly. Maybe, Cade agreed. But here's what's not unsubstantiated. Elara Wynne was legally married to me 4 years ago. We have a son together. That marriage was never annulled or dissolved, which means any subsequent marriage is invalid. She was declared mentally incompetent, Dr. Harrison insisted. Her father had legal authority. Her father is Randolph Wynne, who's currently being investigated for embezzlement and fraud by the territorial government, Cade said. I found that out too. Seems he's been using his daughter's marriages to cover up his failing business ventures. The room erupted in whispers. Elara stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Cade had done this? For her? Even if any of that's true, Blackwood said, his hand moving toward his coat in a way that made Alara's skin crawl. We still have legal documents stating, those documents aren't worth the paper they're printed on, a new voice rang out. A woman entered the church, tall and imposing in a traveling suit, carrying a leather satchel. She had steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Judge Maren Lockhart, she introduced herself. I've been reviewing this case at Mr. Mercer's request. She pulled documents from her satchel. I have evidence of forgery, coercion, and false imprisonment. I have testimony from 3 nurses at West Brookhaven who were willing to testify that patients were being held against their will and medicated unnecessarily to keep them compliant. I have financial records showing significant payments from Randolph Wynne to both Dr. Harrison and Victor Hale. Her gaze swept over the 2 men like a physical force. What I don't have is any legal justification for removing Mrs. Mercer, and yes, she is legally Mrs. Mercer, from this town. This is outrageous, Dr. Harrison sputtered. You can't possibly. I can, and I am, Judge Lockhart said firmly. Gentlemen, you have 2 choices. You can leave Briar Ridge immediately and consider yourselves fortunate. I'm not having you arrested. Or you can stay and answer some very uncomfortable questions from the territorial marshal who should be arriving on this afternoon's train. The 2 men exchanged glances. Blackwood's hand moved away from his coat. Dr. Harrison's face had gone pale. This isn't over, he said quietly. Actually, Judge Lockhart replied, it is. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about being lenient. They left, though not without dark looks that promised this battle might be won, but the war wasn't finished. The moment they were gone, Alara's legs gave out. She would have hit the floor if Cade hadn't caught her, his arms strong and sure around her waist. I've got you, he said softly. I've got you. Elara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You believed me. You investigated. I started to believe you after the calf, Cade admitted. After I saw you work yourself to exhaustion for a week without complaining. After I saw you save that cow and her baby like it was the most important thing in the world. His voice cracked. The woman I loved would have done exactly that. And if there was even a chance you were telling the truth, I had to know. Thank you, Ilara whispered. Thank you for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Papa? Finn's small voice interrupted. Is the pretty lady going to stay now? Cade looked down at their son, then back at Ilara. I think, he said slowly, we need to have that talk I promised. A real one. No more walls, no more anger, just truth. Yes, Ilara said. Please. Judge Lockhart cleared her throat. I'll leave these documents with Pastor Williams for safekeeping. Mrs. Mercer, you're legally free of both your father's authority and the invalid marriage to Victor Hale. However, I recommend staying vigilant. Men like that don't give up easily. After she left, the church slowly emptied, people casting new looks at Ilara. No longer contemptuous, but curious, uncertain. She'd been vindicated, but trust would take time to rebuild. Mrs. Kowalski approached, her expression softer than Ilara had ever seen it. Your mother would be proud, she said simply. You've got her backbone after all. That afternoon, after Finn had been left with Mrs. Williams for a few hours, Cade and Ilara sat in his kitchen, their kitchen from a lifetime ago, and finally talked. Ilara told him everything, not just the broad strokes, but the details. The terror of waking in that carriage, the cold efficiency of her father's betrayal, the wedding to Victor that had felt like a funeral, the years in Westbrook Haven, the treatments, the medication, the days she'd been so broken she'd almost given up, and the memory of holding Finn for 3 hours that had kept her alive through all of it. Cade listened, his face growing harder with every revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. I failed you, he finally said. I should have looked harder, questioned more. I should have known. There was no way you could have known, Ilara interrupted. My father was thorough. He thought of everything. I still should have trusted you more than I trusted the evidence, Cade said. I knew you, I knew your heart, and I let grief and anger convince me you were someone you weren't. We were both victims, Ilara said softly. Both of us lost 4 years we can never get back. But we're here now. That has to count for something. Cade reached across the table, taking her scarred, work-roughened hands in his. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to go back to what we were. We can't go back, Ilara said. We're not those people anymore. But maybe we can move forward. Build something new. With Finn, Cade said. He has to come first. Always, Ilara agreed. He doesn't remember you, Cade warned. As far as he knows, I'm all he has. This is going to confuse him, maybe hurt him. I know, Ilara said. I'm not asking to replace what you've built with him. I'm just asking for a chance to be part of it, however long that takes. Cade studied her face, and she could see him trying to reconcile the girl he'd loved with the woman sitting before him, harder, scarred, but still fighting. One more condition, he said finally. You stay at the ranch, not the boarding house. We do this right. Take it slow, but we do it together, as a family. Ilara's breath caught. You mean it? I mean it, Cade said. But Ilara, I need you to understand I'm not the man I was either. That grief, that anger, it changed me, made me harder, more closed off. I don't know if I can love the way I used to. I don't need you to love me the way you used to, Ilara said. I just need you to give us a chance to figure out who we are now. For the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Cade smiled. A real smile, small and tentative, but genuine. Okay, he said. Let's try. Moving into the ranch house felt like stepping into a dream and a nightmare at once. Ilara stood in the doorway of what had once been meant as their bedroom, seeing how Cade had transformed it into something purely his own. The wallpaper she'd chosen was still there, faded now, but the furniture was different, arranged differently. There were no traces of her anywhere, as if she'd been systematically erased. I put you in the guest room, Cade said from behind her, his voice carefully neutral. Down the hall from Finn's room. I thought it seemed better. For now. Of course, Alara said, swallowing her disappointment. What had she expected? That he'd welcome her back into his bed after one conversation? They were strangers learning each other again, and strangers didn't share rooms. The guest room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the eastern pasture. Someone had left wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, and Alara suspected Mrs. Kowalski's hand in that kindness. Finn usually wakes around 6, Cade said, standing awkwardly in the hallway. He's an early riser. Breakfast is at 6:30. I have ranch work most days, but I try to spend evenings with him before bed. What should I do? Alara asked. During the days, I mean. How do we do this? Cade ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from years ago when he was uncertain. I don't know, he admitted. I've never done this before. Maybe just be around? Let him get used to you? Don't push, but don't hide either. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. That first night, Alara lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the house. Cade's footsteps as he checked on Finn one last time. The creak of floorboards. The distant call of an owl. She was home, but she wasn't home. Not yet. Morning came too early and too bright. Alara dressed in the work clothes Mrs. Kowalski had donated and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Cade already cooking breakfast while Finn sat at the table, coloring a picture. Good morning, she said softly. Finn looked up, his expression curious but cautious. Morning, lady. You can call me Alara, she said, sitting across from him. What are you drawing? A horse, Finn said, pushing the paper toward her. Papa's teaching me to ride. I'm going to be the best rider in Wyoming when I grow up. I bet you will be, Alara said, studying the drawing. It was actually quite good for a 4-year-old, with careful attention to detail. You're very talented. Papa says I get it from my mama, Finn said matter-of-factly. She used to draw too, before she went away. Alara's throat closed. She looked at Cade, who was standing at the stove with his back to them, his shoulders tense. Your mama loved to draw, Alara said carefully. She loved a lot of things. Horses and wildflowers and the way the sky looks right before a storm. How do you know? Finn asked. Because... Alara hesitated, unsure how much to say. She looked at Cade again, and this time he turned, giving her a small nod. Permission. Because I knew her very well. We were very close. Were you best friends? Finn's eyes lit up with the possibility. Something like that, Alara said, her heart breaking and mending at the same time. Breakfast was awkward, filled with long silences and careful conversation. Finn chattered about his latest adventures, about the new calf, about how he'd learned to whistle last week. Cade added occasional comments, and Alara tried to find her place in this dynamic that had existed without her for 4 years. After breakfast, Cade headed out to work on the south fence line, and Alara found herself alone with Finn for the first time without Cade's immediate presence. Want to help me feed the chickens? Finn asked, already heading for the door. I'd love to, Alara said, following him outside. The morning was crisp and cold, the kind of Wyoming autumn morning that promised winter wasn't far behind. Finn chattered as they walked to the chicken coop, pointing out his favorite hens, explaining which ones laid the best eggs and which ones were mean and pecky. That one's called Henrietta, Finn said, pointing to a large brown hen. Papa let me name her, and that's Buttercup, and that's Daisy, not the cow Daisy, a different Daisy. And that one's Monster because she's really big, and sometimes she chases me. Alara laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she'd laughed? Really laughed? Those are excellent names, she said. They scattered feed together, and Finn showed her how to collect eggs without startling the hens too much. His small hands were surprisingly gentle, careful with each egg like it was precious. Papa says we have to be kind to the animals, Finn explained, because they depend on us. We're their family. Your papa is very wise, Alara said softly. Are you going to stay? Finn asked suddenly, looking up at her with those dark eyes that were so achingly familiar. Or are you going to go away like everyone says? Everyone says that? Alara's heart sank. Mrs. Chen told Mrs. Williams that you'd probably leave again, that you're not the staying kind. Finn's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was something uncertain in his expression. Papa gets sad when people leave. Alara knelt down so she was eye level with him. Finn, I need you to understand something very important. I'm not leaving. Not unless your papa tells me I have to go. And even then, I'd fight to stay, because this is where I belong, with you and your papa. Promise? Finn asked. I promise, Alara said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Okay, Finn said, apparently satisfied. Want to see my secret fort? He led her to a spot behind the barn where he'd built a small structure out of old boards and hay bales. It was precarious and probably not very safe, but it was clearly his pride and joy. This is where I come when I'm sad, Finn said, climbing inside. Or when I want to think about stuff. Papa doesn't know about it. It's just mine. Thank you for showing me, Alara said, understanding the trust implicit in the gesture. Your secret is safe with me. They spent the morning together, Finn showing her around the ranch, telling her stories about each animal and building. He talked about his papa constantly, clearly adoring the man who'd raised him alone. And Alara listened, grateful for every detail, every glimpse into the life she'd missed. Around noon, Cade returned for lunch, and Alara noticed the way his eyes immediately sought out Finn, checking that he was okay. When he saw them together, laughing over something silly, a complicated expression crossed his face. You two getting along, he asked. Alara knows all the chickens' names now, Finn announced proudly, and I showed her my fort. Don't be mad, Papa. She's nice. I'm not mad, son, Cade said, his voice softer than Alara had heard it since she'd returned. I'm glad you're making friends. That afternoon, while Finn napped, Alara helped Cade with ranch work. They didn't talk much, but there was something comfortable in the shared labor. She was getting better at the physical tasks, her body adapting to the demands she was placing on it. You're good with him, Cade said suddenly, as they were mending a section of fence together. With Finn, he doesn't usually warm up to people that fast. He's an amazing child, Alara said. You've done an incredible job raising him, Cade. He's kind and gentle and so smart. He asks about you, Cade said quietly. About his mother. I've always told him you loved him very much, that you wanted to stay but couldn't. I never wanted him to think he wasn't wanted. Alara's eyes stung with tears. Thank you for that, for protecting him from the worst of it. I did it for him, not for you, Cade said, but there was no heat in the words, just honesty. I know, Alara said. They worked in silence for a while longer, and then Cade asked, what was it like? Really like, in that place. Alara's hand stilled on the fence post. She'd told him the broad strokes, but he was asking for the details now, the truth of what she'd endured. It was like being buried alive, she said finally. Every day the same. Wake up, take medicine, eat, sit in a room with barred windows, eat, take more medicine, sleep. The medicine made everything fuzzy, made it hard to think. They said it was for my own good, that I was sick and the medicine would help me get better. But you weren't sick, Cade said. No, Alara agreed. I was grieving and terrified and angry, but that's not the same as insane, though after a while I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I'd imagined everything, you, Finn, our life together. Maybe it had all been a delusion. Cade stopped working entirely now, turning to face her. What changed? How did you hold on? The nurses, Alara said. Not all of them were cruel. Some were kind when the doctors weren't watching. One of them, Sarah, she used to sneak me paper and pencils. I'd draw Finn, over and over from memory. Just his face from those 3 hours I held him, and I'd draw you, the ranch, the life we were supposed to have. Her voice broke. Those drawings kept me sane, reminded me it had been real. I wish I'd known, Cade said roughly. I wish I'd kept looking. I should have. You did everything you could with the information you had, Alara interrupted. My father was thorough. He made sure you'd believe I'd left willingly. I still should have known better, Cade insisted. Should have trusted my gut. Because deep down, I never really believed you'd leave. I couldn't face the alternative. That something terrible had happened and I'd failed to protect you. Before Alara could respond, they heard a cry from the house. Both of them were running before the sound had fully registered, Cade slightly ahead. They found Finn in his room, tangled in his sheets, his face flushed and hot. "Papa," he whimpered. "Papa, I don't feel good." Cade's hand went to Finn's forehead, and Alara saw his face pale. "He's burning up." "When did this start?" Alara asked, already moving to the bedside. "I don't know. He was fine at lunch. He seemed tired, so I put him down for a nap, but—" Cade's voice was tight with fear. Alara touched Finn's face, his neck, feeling the dangerous heat radiating from his small body. "We need to cool him down. Now. Get me cold water, cloths, ice if you have any." "Should I get Doc Morrison?" Cade asked. "He's still in Cheyenne, remember?" Alara said, her mind already working through what needed to be done. "We're on our own. Go. Get the water. Move." The command in her voice broke through Cade's panic. He ran. Alara gently untangled Finn from his sheets, stripping him down to his underclothes. His skin was so hot it almost hurt to touch. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Mama?" he mumbled, and Alara's heart stopped. "I'm here, baby," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. "I'm right here." Cade returned with a basin of cold water and an armful of cloths. His hands were shaking as he handed them to Alara. "What do we do?" he asked. "What if—" "We don't think about what if," Alara said firmly, soaking the cloths and beginning to lay them across Finn's burning skin. "We focus on bringing this fever down. How long has it been since you've seen fever in town?" "There was some sickness a few weeks ago," Cade said, his voice hollow. "A few of the children came down with something. Most recovered, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. Alara could read the fear in his eyes. Sarah Miller's baby had died. "This isn't that," Alara said with more confidence than she felt. "We caught it early. We're going to fight this." For the next several hours, they worked together in grim silence. Alara changed the cooling cloths every few minutes, bathing Finn's fevered skin with practiced efficiency that came from her time assisting in the asylum's medical ward. Cade brought fresh water, more ice, anything Alara needed. As afternoon bled into evening, Finn's condition didn't improve. If anything, he seemed to be getting worse. His breathing became labored, his small body shaking with chills despite the fever that raged through him. "Mama!" he called out again in his delirium. "Mama, don't go! Please don't go!" Alara's tears fell freely now, mixing with the water as she bathed his face. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise. I'm right here." "He's asking for you," Cade said quietly. "In his fever, he's asking for you." "Children know," Alara whispered. "Somewhere deep down, they know. Even when they can't remember, they know." Night fell, and Finn's fever climbed higher. Alara refused to leave his side, refused to stop the constant cycle of cooling cloths and whispered prayers. Cade sat on the other side of the bed, holding his son's small hand, his face a mask of barely controlled terror. "I can't lose him," Cade said suddenly, his voice cracking. "Alara, I can't. He's all I have. He's everything." "You're not going to lose him," Alara said fiercely. "I didn't survive 4 years of hell to come back and watch my son die. We're going to fight this. Together." Around midnight, Finn began to convulse. His small body went rigid, his eyes rolling back. "Oh God," Cade breathed. "Oh God, no." "Hold him," Alara commanded. "Hold him steady, but don't restrain him. Let the seizure pass." "How do you know—" "I've seen this before," Alara said, her hands gentle but firm on Finn's shaking body. "At Westbrook, with high fevers. It's terrifying, but it will pass. Just hold him. Talk to him. Let him hear your voice." Cade gathered Finn close, his voice breaking as he murmured, "It's okay, son. Papa's here. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay. Please, Finn. Please fight." The seizure lasted less than a minute, but felt like an eternity. When it finally passed, Finn went limp in his father's arms, his breathing shallow and rapid. "What now?" Cade asked. And he looked so lost, so broken, that Alara wanted to gather him in her arms too. "Now we keep fighting," she said. "We don't give up. We don't stop." She continued the cooling treatments, adding medicine when she could get Finn to swallow, monitoring his breathing, his pulse, every sign of change. Cade stayed beside her, following her instructions without question, trusting her in a way he hadn't since she'd returned. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, with both of them exhausted and Finn still burning with fever, Cade spoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for not believing you sooner, for letting you suffer alone, for—" "Stop," Alara interrupted gently. "We can talk about all of that later. Right now we need to focus on him." "I blamed you," Cade continued as if she hadn't spoken. "For 4 years I blamed you. I was so angry at you for leaving, for abandoning us. And all that time you were—" His voice broke completely. "You were locked away, suffering, and I did nothing." "You didn't know," Alara said. "Cade, you have to forgive yourself. I've already forgiven you." "How can you?" he asked. "How can you forgive me when I gave up on you?" "Because love doesn't keep score," Alara said simply. "And because we don't have time for guilt right now. We need all our energy for him." Just before dawn, something changed. Finn's breathing eased slightly. The rigidity in his small body relaxed, and when Alara checked his temperature, her breath caught. "Cade," she whispered. "Cade." "Feel his forehead." Cade's hand shook as he touched his son's face. Then his eyes widened. It's cooler. The fever's breaking." "It's breaking," Alara confirmed, fresh tears streaming down her face. "He's going to be okay. He's going to make it." They sat there in the pre-dawn darkness, watching their son breathe easier, the crisis passing. Neither of them spoke. There were no words adequate for the relief, the gratitude, the sheer overwhelming emotion of watching a child return from the edge. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, Finn's eyes fluttered open. They were clear now, focused, recognizing. "Papa?" His voice was weak but aware. "I'm here, son," Cade said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here." Finn's eyes moved to Alara. "You stayed," he said simply. "I stayed," Alara confirmed. "I told you I wouldn't leave." "I had bad dreams," Finn said. "I dreamed Mama came back, but then she went away again." Alara looked at Cade, uncertain. They hadn't told Finn who she really was yet, hadn't figured out how to explain something so complicated to a 4-year-old. But Cade surprised her. "Finn," he said gently, "I need to tell you something important. Something I should have told you before, but I was scared. The lady who's been taking care of you, who stayed with you all night." He took a shaky breath. "She is your mama. She came back to us." Finn's eyes widened. He looked from Cade to Alara and back again. "Really? She's really my mama?" "Really," Cade confirmed. "But why did she go away?" Finn asked, the question innocent but cutting. "Bad people took her," Cade said. "People who lied and hurt her. But she fought to come back to us. She never stopped trying to come home." Finn processed this with the surprising wisdom of children. Then he reached out a small hand to Alara. "Are you going to stay now?" he asked. "Forever?" Alara took his hand, holding it like the precious thing it was. "Forever," she promised. "If you and your papa will let me." "I want you to stay," Finn said firmly. Then he looked at Cade. "Papa, do you want Mama to stay?" All eyes turned to Cade. Alara held her breath, waiting. Cade looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd returned. She knew what he saw. A woman worn thin by suffering, scarred by betrayal, but still fighting, still here, still choosing them every single day. "Yes," Cade said quietly. "I want her to stay." Something broke open in Alara's chest, some last wall she'd been holding against hope. She started to cry in earnest then, deep sobs that shook her whole body. "Don't cry, Mama," Finn said, concerned. "Papa said sometimes people have happy tears." "Are these happy tears?" "Yes, baby," Alara managed. "These are the happiest tears I've ever cried." Finn seemed satisfied with that answer. He yawned, the long night of fever finally catching up with him. "I'm tired," he announced. "Then sleep," Cade said, tucking the blankets around him. "We'll be right here when you wake up." "Both of you?" Finn asked. "Both of us," Alara confirmed. Finn's eyes drifted closed, his breathing falling into the easy rhythm of sleep. Healthy sleep this time, not the fevered unconsciousness of before. Alara and Cade sat on either side of the bed, watching him sleep, neither willing to leave yet. The room was filled with early morning light, golden and new, full of promise. "Thank you," Cade said finally, "for knowing what to do, for staying calm when I was falling apart, for saving him." "I didn't save him alone," Alara said. "We did it together." "Like we should have been doing all along," Cade said. "Like we'll do from now on," Alara corrected gently. They sat in silence for a while longer, and then Cade asked, "What happens now? Dr. Harrison and that agent, they're not going to give up. Your father either. Men like that don't accept defeat." "I know," Alara said. "Judge Lockhart said as much. We need to be careful, vigilant." "They could come back," Cade said. "Try to take you again. Try to—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I won't let them. I won't lose you again." "We need to make sure the marriage to Victor is formally annulled," Alara said, her mind already working through the practicalities. "Get legal documentation that's ironclad. Make sure my father can never claim authority over me again. I'll talk to Judge Lockhart today," Cade said. "Get whatever paperwork we need. And I'm going to talk to Sheriff Hayes about increasing patrols near the ranch. If anyone suspicious shows up in town, I want to know immediately." "You do that?" Alara asked. "Go to all that trouble?" "You're my wife," Cade said simply. "You're Finn's mother, your family. Of course I'll do that." The word family settled around Alara like a warm blanket. Family. After 4 years of having nothing and no one, she had a family again. Later that morning, with Finn sleeping peacefully in Cade's ranch hand, Tom watching over the boy, Cade and Alara rode into town together. It was the first time they'd been seen as a united front, and the town noticed. Whispers followed them down Main Street. Some looks were still hostile, suspicious, but others were different now, curious, uncertain. The arrival of Dr. Harrison and Agent Blackwood, followed by Judge Lockhart's dramatic intervention, had shaken the town's certainty about Alara's guilt. They stopped first at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hayes was a grizzled man in his 50s, fair-minded but cautious. He listened to their concerns with a serious expression. "I'll put the word out," he said finally. "Tell my deputies to keep an eye on things. But Mrs. Mercer, you need to understand, if those men come back with proper legal documentation, there's only so much I can do." "I understand," Alara said. "We just want a warning if they return." "You'll get it," Hayes promised. Next, they visited Judge Lockhart at the hotel where she was staying. The judge was drafting documents at a small desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "I've been working on your case since yesterday. The good news is that Victor Hale's marriage to you is legally invalid since you were already married to Mr. Mercer at the time. The asylum's declaration of incompetence is also invalid. It was based on fraudulent claims and forged documents." "What's the bad news?" Cade asked. "The bad news is that proving fraud against men of your father's standing is difficult," Judge Lockhart said, looking at Alara. "He's covered his tracks well. The payments to Westbrook Haven were laundered through several intermediaries. The forgeries are good enough that proving their forgeries would require your testimony, and a good lawyer would simply claim you're mentally unstable." "So we're at a stalemate," Alara said, her heart sinking. "Not exactly," Judge Lockhart said. "I have 3 nurses from Westbrook willing to testify about conditions there. I have financial records showing suspicious patterns. And I have the support of the territorial governor, who's been wanting to investigate your father's business dealings for some time. This case gives him the excuse he needs." "So what do we do?" Cade asked. "You live your lives," Judge Lockhart said firmly. "You rebuild your family. You show this town that you're not running, not hiding, and you let me handle the legal battles. That's what I do best." They left the hotel feeling slightly better, if not entirely reassured. As they walked back toward the general store to pick up supplies, they heard a commotion from the direction of the church. A crowd had gathered, and raised voices carried on the morning air. Cade and Alara hurried toward the sound, arriving just as Mrs. Chen was shouting at someone. "You've got some nerve showing your face here," the older woman was saying. The target of her anger was a well-dressed man in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, stepping down from an expensive carriage. Even before he turned around, Alara knew who it was. Her father. Randolph Wynne had come to Briar Ridge. "Elara," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "There you are, my dear. I've been so worried about you." "Don't," Elara said, her voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare pretend you were worried. Don't you dare act like you care." "Darling, I know you're upset," Randolph said, spreading his hands in a placating gesture. "But you have to understand, I only did what I thought was best. You were ill. You needed help." "I wasn't ill," Elara shouted. "You had me locked away because I wouldn't obey you, because I chose Cade over the life you wanted for me." The crowd pressed closer, eager for the drama. Randolph's eyes flickered to them, calculating. "This isn't the place for this discussion," he said. "Come back to the hotel with me. We can talk privately, sort out this misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Cade interrupted, moving to stand beside Elara. "You kidnapped your daughter, forged documents, and sold her to Victor Hale. That's not concern. That's cruelty." "You have no proof of any of that," Randolph said, his smooth facade cracking slightly. "You have the delusional claims of a mentally unstable girl and the desperation of a man who can't accept that she left him." "I have more than that," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Judge Lockhart approaching, several official-looking documents in her hand. "Mr. Wynne," she said pleasantly, "I'm so glad you decided to come to Briar Ridge. Saves me the trouble of having you brought here by force. You're under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, falsifying legal documents, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. I have warrants for your arrest." Randolph's face went white, then red. "You can't possibly. This is absurd. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Judge Lockhart said. "A man who used his daughter as a pawn in business dealings. A man who paid doctors to imprison a healthy young woman. A man whose financial crimes are about to catch up with him." She gestured to Sheriff Hayes, who'd followed her. "Sheriff?" Hayes stepped forward with handcuffs. "Randolph Wynne, you're under arrest." "This is outrageous," Randolph sputtered as the cuffs clicked shut. "I'll have your badge. I'll have all of you ruined. Do you understand what kind of connections I have?" "I understand that those connections won't help you anymore," Judge Lockhart said calmly. "Several of your business partners have already turned state's evidence to save their own skins. You're finished, Mr. Wynne." As Hayes led Randolph away, still protesting loudly, Elara felt her legs give out. This time when Cade caught her, she clung to him, shaking. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's really over." "Not quite," Judge Lockhart said, approaching them. "Victor Hale is still at large, and he has considerable resources. But with your father in custody and the evidence mounting, I expect he'll distance himself from this whole affair rather than risk his own reputation and freedom." "Thank you," Elara said, looking at the judge with gratitude. "Thank you for believing me, for fighting for me." "I didn't do it just for you," Judge Lockhart said. "I did it because the law should protect the vulnerable, not the powerful. Now go home to your son. Let him see that his mother is safe and here to stay." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing what had just happened. When they arrived, they found Tom sitting on the porch, looking worried. "Finn woke up asking for both of you," he said. "He seemed upset that you weren't here." They hurried inside to find Finn sitting up in bed, tears on his face. "I thought you left," he said when he saw them. "I thought it was another dream, and you'd be gone." Elara went to him, gathering him in her arms. "We went to town to make sure you'd be safe," she explained, "to make sure the bad people who took me away can't do it again." "Are they gone now?" Finn asked. "The bad people?" "They're gone," Cade confirmed, sitting on the other side of the bed. "Your grandfather is in jail, and the other bad people are running away. No one's going to take Mama away from us again." Finn seemed to consider this. Then he asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. Why did grandfather do bad things to Mama? Aren't grandfathers supposed to be nice? It was a complicated question with no easy answer. Elara exchanged a glance with Cade, and he gave her a small nod. "Your call." "Sometimes," Elara said carefully, "people do bad things because they care more about money and power than about the people they're supposed to love. My father was like that. He wanted me to marry someone rich and important, and when I chose to marry your papa instead, he got very angry." "Because Papa's not rich?" Finn asked. "Because your papa is honest and good and hard-working," Elara said. And those things are worth more than all the money in the world. But my father didn't understand that. I'm glad you married Papa, Finn said firmly. Papa's the best. He is, Alara agreed, her eyes finding Cade's across their son's head. He absolutely is. That night, after Finn had finally fallen into a deep, healing sleep, Cade found Alara standing on the porch, looking out at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked, joining her. Too much has happened, Alara said. My mind won't stop racing. Every time I close my eyes, I'm afraid I'll wake up, and this will all have been a dream, that I'll still be in that asylum, and none of this will be real. It's real, Cade said firmly. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Feel that? That's real. Finn sleeping safely inside, that's real. You being here, home, that's real. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Alara admitted. For Victor to show up with more men, for something else to go wrong. It might, Cade said honestly. Life doesn't come with guarantees, but whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means, what family means. Alara turned to look at him, really look at him in the starlight. Do you think we can do this? Really do this? Be a family again? We already are a family, Cade said. We've been a family since the day Finn was born. We just got separated for a while, but Alara, I need you to know something. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm still angry. Part of me is still angry at your father, at Victor Hale, at the whole damn world for what happened to us. And I'm angry at myself for giving up on you. That anger doesn't just disappear because we want it to. I know, Alara said quietly. But, Cade continued, I'm also grateful. Grateful you survived. Grateful you came back. Grateful for the chance to try again. He squeezed her hand. We're not the same people we were 4 years ago. We can't just pick up where we left off. We have to figure out who we are now, together. I want to do that, Alara said. More than anything. They stood there in comfortable silence, hands linked, looking out at the land that was supposed to be their future. It still could be, Alara thought. They'd lost 4 years, but they still had the rest of their lives. Inside, through the window, they could see Finn sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling steadily. A child who'd almost been lost to fever. A child who now had both his parents. Tomorrow, Cade said, we start fresh. Figure out how this family works. Take it one day at a time. One day at a time, Alara echoed. It seemed manageable when broken down like that. Not the whole overwhelming future, just tomorrow. And then the day after that, and the day after that. Building a life, one day at a time. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Alara was in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast while Finn sat at the table drawing another picture of horses, when she heard the sound of a carriage approaching. Her whole body went tense, old fears rising instantly to the surface. Cade must have heard it too, because he came in from the barn, his expression alert and wary. Stay inside with Finn, he said quietly. But Alara moved to the window, needing to see who it was. The carriage that pulled up was elegant, but not ostentatious, and the woman who stepped down was someone Alara had never seen before. She was perhaps 40, dressed in expensive but practical traveling clothes, with auburn hair swept up in a no-nonsense style. Cade went out to meet her, and Alara watched as they spoke. The woman handed him a card, gestured toward the house, and Cade's shoulders relaxed slightly. He nodded and turned back toward the door. It's okay, he called. She says she's a lawyer, from back east. The woman followed Cade inside, and up close Alara could see the shrewd intelligence in her gray eyes. She looked at Alara with the assessing gaze of someone used to reading people quickly and accurately. Mrs. Mercer, she said, extending her hand. I'm Catherine Brennan. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates in Boston. I've been retained by a coalition of women's advocacy groups to represent you in your case against Victor Hale in West Brookhaven. Alara blinked, confused. I don't understand. I didn't hire a lawyer. No, but 3 of the nurses from Westbrook did, Catherine said. They contacted my firm after Judge Lockhart's investigation became public. They want to testify against the asylum's practices, but they need legal protection. Your case gives us the opportunity to shut down West Brookhaven permanently and hold Victor Hale accountable. I still don't understand why you're here, Alara said. Judge Lockhart is already handling everything. Judge Lockhart is excellent at territorial law, Catherine said, but this case crosses state lines. It involves federal marriage law, interstate conspiracy, and medical malpractice. You need representation that can navigate those waters. She pulled documents from her leather satchel. I'm here to offer you my services, free of charge. This isn't just about you, Mrs. Mercer. It's about every woman who's been locked away by men who claim to know what's best for her. Cade looked at Alara. It's your choice. But more help doesn't seem like a bad thing. What would this mean? Alara asked. If I accept your representation? It means we go after Victor Hale with everything we have, Catherine said. Civil suit for damages, criminal charges for conspiracy and false imprisonment, a full investigation into West Brookhaven's practices. It means your story becomes public, very public. Every newspaper in the country will cover this case. Alara felt her stomach drop. Everyone will know? Everyone will know what was done to you, Catherine corrected gently. And more importantly, everyone will know that you fought back, that you refused to disappear, that you won. She leaned forward. Mrs. Mercer, there are hundreds of women right now in asylums across this country who aren't sick. They're there because they were inconvenient, disobedient, or in the way of someone's plans. Your case could change that, could make it harder for men to simply dispose of the women in their lives. That's a lot of pressure, Alara said quietly. It is, Catherine agreed, which is why I'm not asking you to decide right now. Think about it. Discuss it with your husband. I'm staying at the hotel in town for the week. You can find me there when you're ready. After she left, Alara and Cade sat at the kitchen table while Finn went back to the barn to check on the new calf. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. What are you thinking? Cade asked finally. I'm thinking that I've barely gotten my life back, and now someone wants me to relive all of it in front of the entire country, Alara said. I'm thinking that I just want to be left alone, to heal, to be a mother to my son and figure out how to be a wife to my husband again. Those are good reasons to say no, Cade said. But Catherine's right, Cade said slowly. If there are other women going through what you went through, and your story could help them. He reached across the table, taking her hand. I'll support whatever you decide. If you want to put this behind us and never speak of it again, I understand. If you want to fight, I'll fight beside you. I'm tired of fighting, Alara admitted. I've been fighting for 4 years. I just want peace. Then we'll have peace, Cade said firmly. But over the next few days, Alara found she couldn't stop thinking about Catherine's words. Every time she looked at Finn, she thought about all the other mothers who'd been separated from their children. Every time she caught Cade watching her with that mixture of relief and residual fear, she thought about all the families torn apart by men with too much power and too little conscience. On the third day, she rode into town alone and found Catherine at the hotel restaurant, reviewing documents over coffee. I'll do it, Alara said without preamble. I'll testify, I'll tell my story, whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Catherine looked up, a slow smile spreading across her face. You're sure? No, Alara said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Good, Catherine said. Then let's get to work. The work, it turned out, was exhausting. Catherine interviewed Alara for hours each day, going over every detail of her imprisonment. What happened when? Who said what? The names of doctors, nurses, orderlies. The types of treatments administered, the conditions in the asylum, every humiliation, every cruelty, every moment of despair. Alara relived it all, and each night she went back to the ranch feeling scraped raw and hollow. But Cade was always there, and Finn, and slowly she began to understand that talking about it wasn't the same as being trapped in it. The memories had power, yes, but they didn't own her anymore. Meanwhile, news of the case was spreading. Reporters began showing up in Briar Ridge, asking questions, trying to interview anyone who'd known Alara before. The town, which had been slowly warming to her, now found itself in the national spotlight. Some people embraced it. Mrs. Kowalski gave several interviews about Caroline Wynn's quiet suffering and her daughter's strength. Pastor Williams spoke about forgiveness and redemption. Even Mrs. Chen, who'd been one of Alara's harshest critics, admitted to a reporter that she'd been wrong to judge so quickly, but others resented the attention. Thomas Wright complained loudly that the whole thing was being blown out of proportion. A few of the older families muttered about scandal and suggested that Alara should have kept quiet for the sake of propriety. One afternoon, as Alara was walking back from town with supplies, a group of women stopped her on the street. She tensed, expecting more judgment, more accusations. Instead, the woman in front, Sarah Jenkins, a rancher's wife Alara vaguely remembered from before, stepped forward and said, "We wanted to thank you." Alara blinked. "Thank me?" "My sister was locked away by her husband 5 years ago," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He said she was hysterical, that she couldn't manage the household. Really, she'd just discovered he was gambling away their savings and confronted him about it. She's still in an asylum in California. We've been trying to get her out, but her husband has all the legal power." She grabbed Alara's hand. "What you're doing, the case you're bringing, it might give us the legal precedent we need to challenge her imprisonment." The other women nodded, and Alara saw similar stories written on their faces. Sisters, daughters, friends, all lost to the convenience of men who found them troublesome. "I'm so sorry about your sister," Alara said. "I hope the case helps. I really do." "You're braver than any of us," another woman said. "Standing up there telling the truth even when it's hard. That takes courage." After they left, Alara stood on the street corner, feeling the weight of what she'd taken on. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been, really. It was about Sarah's sister and Catherine's coalition and the hundreds of nameless women still locked away. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late October in Cheyenne. Catherine explained that this wasn't the full trial, just a hearing to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed with both civil and criminal charges. "Victor Hale will be there," Catherine warned. "His lawyers, too. They're going to try to discredit you, make you seem unstable or vindictive. You need to be prepared for that." "I've faced him before," Alara said quietly. "I survived 4 years of his marriage. I can survive a few hours in a courtroom." The night before they were due to leave for Cheyenne, Alara found Finn in his room, staring out the window with unusual seriousness for a 4-year-old. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Are you going to be gone long?" he asked. "When you go to the city?" "Just a few days," Alara assured him. "Papa's coming with me, but Mrs. Kowalski will stay here with you." "I don't want you to go," Finn said, his voice small. "What if you don't come back?" Alara's heart clenched. Of course he was afraid of that. He'd lost her once already. "Finn, look at me," she said gently. He turned, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I am coming back. Nothing and no one is going to keep me from coming back to you. Do you understand?" "You promise?" Finn asked. "I promise," Alara said. "I'm going to the city to talk to some people about the bad things that happened. And when I'm done, I'm coming straight home to you. Papa will make sure of it." "Papa won't let the bad men take you?" Finn asked. "Papa won't let anyone take me," Alara confirmed. "Neither will I. I'm much stronger now than I was before." Finn seemed to consider this. Then he reached under his pillow and pulled out a small carved horse, the one Cade had made for him the previous Christmas. "Take this," Finn said, pressing it into her hand. "It's my lucky horse. It'll keep you safe." Alara's eyes filled with tears. "Finn, this is your special horse. I can't take it." "Now, you have to," Finn insisted. "When you look at it, you'll remember you have to come home, because I need it back." Alara clutched the small wooden horse, feeling its weight like a sacred trust. "Then I'll definitely come back," she said. "I promise." The journey to Cheyenne took most of the day by train. Cade sat beside Alara, his presence solid and reassuring, while Catherine reviewed legal documents across from them. Judge Lockhart had traveled separately, planning to testify about the evidence she'd uncovered. When they finally arrived and checked into the hotel, Alara felt exhaustion pulling at her. But Catherine wanted to review testimony one more time, so they gathered in Catherine's room and went over every expected question. "Victor's lawyers are going to argue that the marriage was legitimate because your father had legal guardianship," Catherine said. "They'll say you were incompetent and needed protection. How do you respond?" "I wasn't incompetent," Alara said. "I was grieving the loss of my child and terrified of my father. Those are normal human emotions, not signs of mental illness." "Good. They'll bring up the note you supposedly wrote, the witnesses who saw you packing. How do you respond? The note was forged. The witnesses were paid or coerced. I never packed because I never intended to leave. They went on like this for hours, Catherine playing devil's advocate, Alara defending herself. By the time they finished, Alara felt like she'd already been through the hearing. That night, unable to sleep, she stood at the hotel window looking out at Cheyenne's lights. Behind her, she heard Cade stirring in the bed. Come back to bed, he said softly. You need rest. I keep thinking about seeing him tomorrow, Alara admitted. Victor, I haven't seen him since I escaped. What if... She trailed off. What if what? Cade prompted, getting up and coming to stand beside her. What if I freeze? Alara whispered. What if I look at him and I'm that terrified girl again, unable to speak, unable to fight? Cade turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You're not that girl anymore, he said firmly. You're a woman who survived hell, who escaped an asylum, who fought her way back to her family, who saved our son's life. Victor Hale should be afraid of you, not the other way around. I don't feel strong, Alara said. Strength isn't about feeling fearless, Cade said. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. And Alara, you're the strongest person I know. She leaned into him, letting his warmth anchor her. What if they don't believe me? She asked. What if the judge sides with Victor? Then we fight harder, Cade said simply. We don't give up. We never give up. The next morning, they arrived at the courthouse to find a crowd already gathered. Reporters shouted questions. Supporters held signs. Somewhere in the mix, Alara caught sight of Sarah Jenkins and the other women from Briar Ridge standing in solidarity. Inside the courtroom, Catherine guided them to their seats. And then, from the other side of the room, Victor Hale entered. He looked exactly as Alara remembered. Tall, distinguished, silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suit tailored to perfection. He looked like a respectable businessman, a pillar of the community. He looked like everything the world said a man should be. He also looked like the man who'd claimed ownership of her body, her life, her very existence for 4 years. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Alara saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she was really here, or perhaps anger that she dared to challenge him. But she didn't look away. She held his gaze steadily, letting him see that she wasn't the broken girl he'd thought he'd married. She was someone else now, someone he couldn't control. Victor looked away first. The judge entered, an older man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Catherine had assured Alara that Judge Warren was a good draw for their case, someone who'd shown sympathy for women's rights in previous rulings. The preliminary hearing began with opening statements. Victor's lawyer, a slick man named Thornton, painted a picture of a tragic situation. A young woman who'd suffered a breakdown, a concerned father who'd sought the best medical care, a marriage arranged for her protection and benefit. Mr. Hale is the victim here, Thornton said smoothly. A man of good reputation and standing who married a troubled young woman out of compassion, only to have her escape from necessary medical care and then slander him with these outrageous accusations. Then Catherine stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Your Honor, this isn't a story about compassion, she said. It's a story about power and its abuse, about men who use the law to imprison women who dare to disobey them, about an asylum that profits from keeping patients against their will, and about a young woman who had the courage to escape and fight back. She laid out the evidence methodically, the forged documents, the financial records showing payments between Randolph Wynn and both Victor Hale and Westbrook Haven, the testimonies from nurses about the asylum's practices. She presented proof that Alara's first marriage to Cade was legal and never dissolved, making the subsequent marriage to Victor invalid. Then it was time for witness testimony. Judge Lockhart went first, presenting her findings with calm authority. One of the nurses from Westbrook followed, describing in detail the conditions at the asylum and confirming that Alara had never shown signs of mental illness. Finally, Catherine called Alara to the stand. The walk to the witness box felt like miles. Alara could feel every eye in the courtroom on her, judging, assessing, waiting to see if she'd break. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then she sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking, and looked at Catherine. Mrs. Mercer, Catherine began, Can you tell the court what happened on the night of November 14th, 4 years ago? Alara took a deep breath and began to speak. She told them about the wedding, about Finn's birth, about feeding her son for the first time. She told them about her father bursting into the room with two men, about the cloth over her face, about waking in a carriage heading east. Her voice remained steady as she described the asylum, the forced marriage, the years of imprisonment. She didn't cry, didn't dramatize. She simply told the truth in clear, factual terms. When Catherine finished her questions, Victor's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Thornton approached with a sympathetic smile that made Alara's skin crawl. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "or should I say Mrs. Hale? You've told us quite a story, but isn't it true that you'd been exhibiting erratic behavior before your admission to Westbrook Haven?" "No," Alara said firmly. "No?" Thornton raised an eyebrow. "You weren't anxious, frightened, perhaps even volatile?" "I was frightened of my father," Alara said. "He'd made it clear he disapproved of my marriage to Cade. That's not erratic behavior. That's a reasonable response to a real threat." "A threat that manifested how?" Thornton asked. "Did your father ever actually harm you before that night?" "He controlled every aspect of my life," Alara said. "He chose my clothes, my friends, what I ate, and when. When I tried to assert independence, he locked me in my room without food. Is that harm enough for you?" Thornton's smile tightened. "You claim you were dragged away against your will. Yet there's a note in your handwriting saying you needed to leave." "A forged note," Alara corrected. "Forged?" Thornton pulled out the note. "This is your handwriting, is it not?" "It's handwriting that looks like mine," Alara said. "My father had access to my diary, pages of my writing. He was meticulous in his planning." "So your defense is that everything that contradicts your story is a lie or a forgery?" Thornton's voice dripped with skepticism. "My defense is the truth," Alara said, her voice rising slightly. "I was kidnapped. I was imprisoned. I was forced into a marriage I never consented to, and I fought every single day to get back to my real family." "Your real family," Thornton repeated. "The family you claim to love so much. Yet isn't it true that when you first returned to Briar Ridge, your own husband didn't believe you? Even he thought you'd abandoned them." The words hit like a physical blow. Alara's eyes found Cade in the gallery, saw the pain on his face. "My husband believed the lies my father told him," Alara said quietly. "Just like everyone else did. My father was very convincing. But once Cade knew the truth, he believed me. He fought for me. That's what love does." "Or perhaps," Thornton suggested, "he simply wanted to believe you because the alternative was too painful. Perhaps you've convinced yourself of this narrative because you can't face the truth, that you did leave, that you did marry Mr. Hale of your own free will, and now you regret it and want to rewrite history." "I don't need to rewrite history," Alara said, her voice shaking now with anger instead of fear. "I lived it. Every day of those 4 years, I lived it. Every dose of medication that made my mind foggy. Every time I was told I was crazy for insisting I had a son. Every night I cried myself to sleep in a locked room. I lived it, Mr. Thornton, and no amount of legal maneuvering on your part can change what really happened." She was breathing hard now, her composure finally cracking. But as she looked out at the courtroom, she didn't see judgment in most faces. She saw belief. She saw sympathy. She saw people who'd heard the truth in her words. "No further questions," Thornton said, returning to his seat. Catherine stood. "Redirect, Your Honor. Mrs. Mercer, why did you come back to Briar Ridge after you escaped?" "Because that's where my family is," Alara said simply. "My husband, my son, my home. I spent 4 years trying to get back to them. There was never any question of where I belonged. And if you could say anything to the other women who might be in situations similar to yours, what would you say?" Alara looked directly at the gallery, at Sarah Jenkins and the other women who'd come to support her. "I'd say fight," she said. "Fight to be heard. Fight to be believed. Fight to come home. And never ever let anyone convince you that you're crazy for knowing your own truth." The courtroom erupted in applause before the judge could stop it. He banged his gavel, calling for order, but Alara could see the slight smile on his face. After a brief recess, Judge Warren delivered his ruling. Having heard the evidence presented, he said, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed with both civil and criminal charges against Victor Hale and Westbrook Haven. Additionally, this court recognizes that the marriage between Alara Wynne and Cade Mercer, which took place 4 years ago, is the only valid marriage. The subsequent ceremony involving Mr. Hale is declared null and void. Victor's face went purple with rage, but his lawyer held him back as he tried to stand. Furthermore, Judge Warren continued, this court is disturbed by the evidence of systematic abuse at Westbrook Haven and will be recommending a full federal investigation into that facility and others like it. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors. Supporters cheered. Victor Hale and his lawyer retreated quickly, surrounded by guards. Alara sat frozen in the witness box, unable to process that it was over, that she'd won. Cade was there suddenly, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. You did it, he whispered fiercely. God, Alara, you did it. We did it, she corrected, pulling back to look at him. I couldn't have done this without you. Catherine approached, professional satisfaction written all over her face. That was perfect, she said. The full trial will be more complex, but after today I'm very confident. Victor Hale is going to pay for what he did to you. Sarah Jenkins pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she said, grabbing Alara's hands. Thank you so much. Our lawyer says this ruling gives us grounds to challenge my sister's imprisonment. We might actually get her back. More women approached, sharing similar stories, offering gratitude and hope. Alara listened to each one, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished today. Not just for her, but for all of them. As they finally made their way out of the courthouse, reporters surrounded them, shouting questions. Catherine handled most of them with professional ease, but one reporter pushed through to Alara directly. Mrs. Mercer, what do you say to people who claim you're doing this for attention or money? Alara stopped, looked directly at the reporter and said, I say they've never been locked in a room and told they're crazy for knowing their own mind. I say they've never had their child stolen from them. I say they should pray they never have to learn what it's like to fight for your freedom. I'm not doing this for attention. I'm doing it so other women don't have to fight alone. The quote would be in every newspaper by morning. That night, back at the hotel, Alara finally allowed herself to fall apart. She sat on the bed and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Cade held her through it, not trying to fix it or stop it, just being there. I looked at him, she gasped between sobs. I looked Victor in the eye, and I didn't break. I didn't let him win. You won, Cade said fiercely. Alara, you stood up there and you told the truth, and everyone believed you. You won. It hurts so much, Alara whispered, reliving all of it, saying it all out loud. I know, Cade said, but it's over now. The worst is over. They stayed in Cheyenne for 2 more days while Catherine handled the paperwork and filed motions for the full trial. When they finally boarded the train back to Briar Ridge, Alara felt lighter than she had in years. Finn was waiting at the station with Mrs. Kowalski, and the moment he saw them, he broke away and ran. Alara dropped to her knees just in time to catch him, holding him close and breathing in the little boy's smell of him. You came back, Finn said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. You promised, and you came back. Always, Alara said. I'll always come back to you. She pulled back and fished the wooden horse from her pocket. And I believe this is yours. Finn took it, clutching it like the treasure it was. Then he looked up at both his parents. Can we go home now? He asked. Yes, Cade said, scooping him up. Let's go home. As they walked to the wagon, Alara noticed the crowd that had gathered at the station. The whole town, it seemed, had come to meet them. And instead of the hostile stares she'd faced weeks ago, she saw respect, admiration, acceptance. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Mercer, she said formally, I owe you an apology. I judged you harshly based on lies. I'm sorry. Other voices joined in, offering apologies, expressing support. It wasn't unanimous. She could still see Thomas Wright glowering in the back, but it was enough. Thank you, Alara said simply. All of you. Thank you for giving me a second chance. That night, after Finn was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Alara and Cade sat by the fire in the living room. Cade had his arm around her and she leaned into his warmth, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. What happens now? Cade asked. With the trial, I mean. Catherine says it could take months, Alara said. There will be more hearings, more testimony, but she's confident we'll win. And after, Cade pressed, after it's all over and Victor Hale is in prison and Westbrook Haven is shut down? What then? Then we live, Alara said simply. We raise our son. We work the ranch. We build the life we were supposed to have. Together, Cade said. Together, Alara agreed. She turned to look at him, really look at him in the firelight. This man who'd believed the worst of her, then fought for her when he learned the truth. This man who'd raised their son alone and loved him so fiercely. This man who was giving her a second chance at the future they'd both lost. I love you, she said. The first time she'd said it since coming back. I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't remember my own name sometimes. Even when the medicine made everything else foggy. I always knew I loved you. Cade's eyes shone with unshed tears. I love you too, he said, his voice rough. I tried not to. Tried to kill it with anger and grief, but it just kept burning, waiting for you to come home and bring it back to life. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper. It wasn't like the passionate kisses of their youth. This was something different, tempered by loss and suffering and survival. It was a promise and a healing all at once. When they finally pulled apart, Cade rested his forehead against hers. We're going to make it, he said. All of us. We're going to be okay. Yes, Alara agreed, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. We are. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the prairie, but inside they were warm and safe and home. Together, the way they were always meant to be. The weeks following the hearing brought a strange new rhythm to their lives. Alara woke each morning still half expecting to find herself back in that locked room, but instead she found sunlight streaming through real windows, the smell of coffee from the kitchen, and the sound of Finn's laughter as Cade got him ready for the day. The town was changing too. More women began approaching Alara, quietly at first, sharing their own stories. A wife whose husband controlled every penny she earned, a daughter whose father refused to let her inherit the family business, a widow whose in-laws were trying to declare her incompetent so they could take her property. These women had lived their whole lives believing they had no choice, no voice, no power. Alara's case was showing them differently. One crisp November morning, Alara was in the barn mucking stalls when she heard a commotion from the direction of the house. Her heart seized with old fear, but then she heard Finn's excited shout and relaxed slightly. She emerged from the barn to find a wagon pulling up, and climbing down from it was a face she never thought she'd see again. Sarah, Alara gasped, recognizing the nurse from Westbrook Haven, the kind one who'd smuggled her paper and pencils. Sarah turned, and her face lit up when she saw Alara. She was thinner than Alara remembered, with dark circles under her eyes, but alive and here and real. Mrs. Mercer, Sarah said, her voice breaking, I had to come. After your testimony, after everything came out, I couldn't stay there anymore. Dr. Harrison was arrested and the new administrators were cleaning house. They let me go, but I didn't mind. I couldn't work there another day knowing what I'd been part of. You weren't part of it, Alara said firmly, crossing the yard to embrace her. You were one of the few things that kept me sane. I should have done more, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. I should have helped you escape sooner. I should have spoken up about what was happening there. You're speaking up now, Alara said. Catherine told me you're testifying at the trial. That takes courage. I'm terrified, Sarah admitted. I'll lose any chance of working as a nurse again. The other doctors, they'll blacklist me. Then you'll find different work, a voice said. Mrs. Kowalski had come out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Lord knows this town could use a good nurse. Doc Morrison's getting on in years. He could use an assistant. Sarah blinked, hope dawning in her expression. You think he'd hire me? After everything? I think he'd be lucky to have someone with your experience and your conscience, Mrs. Kowalski said firmly. Come on inside. You look half-starved. Let's get some food in you, and then we'll talk to the doc. As Sarah followed Mrs. Bess Kowalski inside, Cade appeared from the south pasture, leading his horse. He took in the scene and raised an eyebrow at Alara. "Friend of yours?" he asked. "The friend who kept me alive," Alara said softly. "The one who reminded me I wasn't crazy, that my memories were real." Cade's expression softened. "Then she's welcome here as long as she needs." That evening, the house felt more alive than it had in years. Sarah stayed for dinner, entertaining Finn with stories about the city while carefully avoiding any mention of the asylum. Doc Morrison had indeed agreed to take her on as an assistant, particularly impressed by her knowledge of difficult births and fever management. After Finn was in bed, the three adults sat around the kitchen table with coffee, and Sarah finally asked the question Alara had been waiting for. "How are you really?" Sarah said. "Not the brave face you put on for the newspapers. How are you truly managing?" Alara considered the question carefully. "Some days are better than others," she admitted. "Sometimes I hear a door lock and I panic. Sometimes Finn will ask about something from when he was a baby, something I missed, and the grief nearly crushes me. But then I look at him, at Cade, at this life we're building, and I remember that I survived, that I won." "You did more than survive," Sarah said. "You fought back. Do you know how many women have reached out to Westbrook since your testimony? Women demanding the release of their sisters, daughters, mothers. The place is under investigation by 3 different government agencies. You did that." "We did that," Alara corrected. "You and the other nurses who spoke up, Catherine and her legal team, Judge Lockhart, all of us together." "Still," Sarah said, "you started it. You were brave enough to come forward first." The next morning brought news that sent ripples through not just Briar Ridge but across the country. Victor Hale had been arrested trying to flee to Mexico. He'd been caught at the border with trunks full of cash and documents showing years of financial fraud and conspiracy. His arrest made front-page news in every major paper. Catherine sent a telegram that arrived at the general store by midday. The trial date had been moved up. With Victor in custody and more evidence coming to light daily, the territorial prosecutors wanted to move quickly before any more evidence could be destroyed. The full trial was scheduled for the first week of December, in Denver this time, at the federal courthouse. It would be bigger than the preliminary hearing, more witnesses, more evidence, more eyes watching. "I have to go again," Alara told Cade that night. "I have to see this through to the end." "I know," Cade said. "We'll go together. Mrs. Kowalski can watch Finn again." But Finn, who'd been listening from the doorway, had other ideas. "I want to come," he announced. Both parents turned to look at him. "Sweetheart, the trial isn't a place for children," Alara said gently. "But I want to see the bad man," Finn insisted. "The one who hurt Mama. I want him to know that Mama has a family who loves her." Alara looked at Cade, uncertain. Part of her wanted to protect Finn from all of this, to keep him innocent of the darkness that existed in the world. But another part understood his need to be there, to be part of this final battle. "We'll think about it," Cade said diplomatically. "But Finn, you need to understand that if you come, you'll hear things about what happened to Mama. Scary things. Adult things. Are you sure you want that?" Finn thought about it with the seriousness only a child could muster. Then he nodded. "I want to be there. Mama was brave. I want to be brave too." In the end, they decided Finn would come but wouldn't attend the actual trial proceedings. Mrs. Kowalski volunteered to travel with them and watch Finn during the day, bringing him to the courthouse only for the verdict. The journey to Denver felt different from the trip to Cheyenne. There was less fear this time, less uncertainty. Alara felt like she was heading toward an ending rather than into an unknown beginning. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented a damning case. Forged documents, financial records, testimony from multiple women who'd been imprisoned at West Brookhaven, expert witnesses on marriage law and medical ethics. Catherine's opening statement was a masterpiece, painting a picture of systematic abuse of power that had the entire courtroom riveted. Victor's defense team tried to argue that he'd been deceived by Randolph Wynn, that he genuinely believed Alara was mentally ill and needed care, that the marriage had been legal according to the documents he'd been given. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial connections between Victor, Randolph, and Dr. Harrison showed clear conspiracy. The testimonies from nurses and former patients at West Brookhaven revealed a pattern of imprisoning inconvenient women for profit. On the second day, they called Randolph Wynn from his jail cell to testify. Alara's father looked haggard, diminished, nothing like the powerful man who'd once controlled her life. When asked about the conspiracy, he initially tried to maintain his innocence. But when faced with the mountain of evidence, he finally broke. "I did it for her own good," he said, his voice cracking. She was throwing her life away on a nobody rancher. Victor could give her everything: money, status, security. I thought once she had time to see reason, she'd understand. "You thought locking her in an asylum would make her see reason?" the prosecutor asked incredulously. "I thought it would keep her safe until she came to her senses," Randolph said. "I thought she'd thank me eventually." Alara felt Cade's hand tighten on hers. She looked at her father, this man who'd claimed to love her while destroying her life, and felt nothing but pity. He'd lost everything in his quest for status and power: his business, his freedom, his daughter's love. He'd won nothing and lost everything that mattered. "I don't forgive you," Alara said quietly, though she wasn't sure her father could hear her from the witness stand. "But I'm not going to let what you did define the rest of my life." On the third day, Alara testified again. It was easier this time, the words more practiced, the fear less sharp. She told her story with clarity and strength, looking directly at Victor when she described his cruelty, refusing to be ashamed or diminished. Victor's lawyer tried to shake her testimony, tried to suggest she'd exaggerated or misremembered, but Alara didn't waver. She had the truth on her side, and 4 years of survival had made her unshakable. The closing arguments took most of the afternoon. Catherine spoke passionately about justice and accountability, about the need to protect vulnerable women from men who saw them as property. Victor's lawyer made a final desperate attempt to paint his client as a victim of circumstance. Then the jury retired to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. Alara and Cade sat in the corridor outside the courtroom, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah sat with them, along with several other women who'd come to show support. Mrs. Kowalski brought Finn by for a brief visit, and his cheerful chatter broke some of the tension. After 4 hours, the jury sent word they'd reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Alara reached for Cade's hand as the jury foreman stood. She felt surprisingly calm, like she'd already done the hardest part. Whatever happened next, she'd told her truth. She'd fought back. She'd refused to disappear. On the charge of conspiracy to commit false imprisonment, we find the defendant, Victor Hale, guilty. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of coercion, we find the defendant guilty. The foreman continued through all 17 charges. Guilty. 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 Victor's face went from red to white to gray. His lawyers slumped in defeat, and the courtroom erupted in applause and cheers that the judge didn't even try to stop. Alara sat frozen, unable to process that it was finally, truly over. Victor would go to prison. Westbrook Haven was being shut down. Her father was already in jail. The men who'd stolen 4 years of her life were finally facing consequences. "You won," Cade said, pulling her into his arms. "Alara, you won." "We won," she corrected, but she was crying too hard to say much more. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them with questions, but Catherine handled most of them. When they finally asked Alara for a statement, she thought about everything she'd been through, everything she'd learned, everything she wanted other women to know. 4 years ago, men with power tried to erase me, she said, her voice clear and strong. They locked me away and told me I was nothing. They tried to make me disappear, but I refused to disappear. I fought my way back to my family, and I fought for justice not just for myself, but for every woman who's been silenced, dismissed, or locked away for being inconvenient. Today's verdict says that women's lives matter, that women's voices matter, that we will not be erased. The quote would be reprinted in newspapers across the country. Years later, it would be taught in schools as part of the early women's rights movement, but in that moment, Alara was just relieved it was over. The journey back to Briar Ridge was celebratory. Even Finn, who didn't fully understand what had happened, caught the mood and chattered excitedly about going home. Mrs. Kowalski produced a bottle of champagne from somewhere, and they toasted quietly in their train compartment. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked. "With all this attention, you could go anywhere, do anything." "I'm going home," Alara said simply. I'm going to raise my son, work the ranch with my husband, live the life I was supposed to have. That's it? Sarah seemed surprised. You're not going to lecture, write a book, keep campaigning? Maybe someday, Alara said. But right now, I've fought enough. Right now, I just want to live. When they finally arrived in Briar Ridge, the entire town was waiting at the station. Someone had strung up a banner that read, "Welcome home, Alara," and the crowd broke into applause when she stepped off the train. It was overwhelming and wonderful and slightly embarrassing all at once. Pastor Williams gave a short speech about justice and redemption. Mrs. Chen presented Alara with a cake she'd baked specially. Even Thomas Wright, who'd been one of her harshest critics, approached and offered a gruff apology. But the best moment came when they finally made it back to the ranch. Alara stood in the yard, looking at the house and barn and pastures, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Home. She was finally, completely, irrevocably home. That night, after Finn was asleep and the excitement had died down, Alara found herself standing in the doorway of what had been the guest room. Her room, these past weeks, separate from Cade, separate from the life they'd once planned to share. Alara? Cade's voice came from behind her. Everything okay? She turned to face him. I don't want to sleep in here anymore, she said. I don't want to be separate from you. We're married. We have a son. We fought so hard to get back to each other. I'm done pretending we're strangers. Cade's expression was unreadable. Are you sure? We've been taking things slow, getting to know each other again. I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. I'm not the girl you married 4 years ago, Alara said, and you're not the man you were then. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need to be those people. Maybe we can just be who we are now, together. Cade crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. I love who you are now, he said fiercely. The strength you've gained, the fire you've found. You're incredible, Alara. More incredible than I ever imagined. Then love me, Alara whispered. Not like you did before. Love me like I am now, scars and all. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, a promise and a homecoming all at once. And that night, for the first time since her return, Alara slept in their bed, in her husband's arms, in the room they were always meant to share. The next few weeks brought a new kind of peace. Without the looming trial, without the constant fear of Victor or her father, Alara found herself able to truly breathe. She threw herself into ranch work, into learning to be Finn's mother, into rebuilding her marriage one day at a time. There were still hard moments. Sometimes a locked door would send her into a panic. Sometimes the nightmares came, dreams of being back in that asylum, and she'd wake up gasping and disoriented. But Cade was always there, reminding her where she was, that she was safe, that she was home. Finn adapted to having both parents with the resilience of children. He still called Cade Papa, but had started calling Alara Mama naturally, as if she'd always been there. He showed her his favorite spots on the ranch, taught her the names of all the animals, and included her in the bedtime routine that he and Cade had established. One evening, as Alara was tucking Finn in, he asked, Mama, will you tell me a story? What kind of story? Alara asked. A story about when you were little, Finn said, like Papa does. He tells me stories about when he was a boy and learned to ride horses. What did you do when you were little? Alara thought about her childhood, about the strict rules and her father's control. But she also remembered her mother, before illness took her, remembered the secret moments of joy they'd shared. When I was little, Alara said, my mama used to take me on walks in the garden. She loved flowers, especially wildflowers. She said they were the prettiest because no one planted them or told them where to grow. They just grew wherever they wanted, wild and free. Like the ones by the creek? Finn asked. Exactly like those, Alara said. My mama said that's how people should be too, wild and free, growing wherever they're meant to be. Is that why you came back? Finn asked. Because you're meant to grow here? Alara felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, sweetheart. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. Winter settled over Wyoming, and with it came a different rhythm. The ranch work was different in cold months, focused on keeping animals fed and warm, on preparing for spring. Alara learned to appreciate the slower pace, the long evenings by the fire, the way snow made everything clean and new. A letter arrived in January from Catherine. The federal government had shut down West Brookhaven permanently and were investigating 12 other asylums across the country for similar practices. 3 more had been closed already. Dozens of women had been released and reunited with their families. Sarah's sister among them. "You did that," Cade said, reading over her shoulder. "You started all of this." "We did it," Alara corrected, but she felt the weight of it. The responsibility and the pride of knowing that her suffering hadn't been meaningless, that some good had come from all that pain. February brought an unexpected visitor. Judge Marin Lockhart arrived at the ranch on a cold afternoon, looking official and determined. "I won't take much of your time," she said, accepting coffee in the warm kitchen. "I wanted to tell you in person that your father's trial is set for next month. He's facing 20 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy. The prosecution wanted me to ask if you'd testify." Alara felt her stomach drop. "I thought it was over," she said quietly. "The charges against Victor are settled," Judge Lockhart said, "but your father is being tried separately for the financial crimes. Your testimony isn't necessary for conviction, but it would help establish motive and pattern of behavior." "Do you want to?" Cade asked, taking Alara's hand. Alara thought about her father, about the man who'd raised her and destroyed her in equal measure. She thought about facing him again, about dredging up all that pain one more time. "No," she said finally. "I don't. I've said everything I need to say. Let the financial evidence speak for itself. I'm done giving him any more of my time or energy." Judge Lockhart nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might say that. I'll tell the prosecutors. They have plenty of evidence without you." After she left, Cade turned to Alara. "Are you sure? If you need to face him one more time—" "I'm sure," Alara interrupted. "I've spent enough of my life being defined by what he did to me. I'm ready to be defined by what I do with the rest of my life." Spring came early that year, and with the thaw came new beginnings. Sarah had settled into town, working alongside Doc Morrison and gaining the community's respect. Several other women who'd testified at the trial had also moved to Briar Ridge, finding safety and support in numbers. One warm April afternoon, as Alara worked in the garden she'd started planting, Mrs. Kowalski came by with news. "There's a woman at my boarding house," she said. "Arrived this morning on the train. Says she heard about what you did, about the case. She's running from her husband, needs a place to stay until she can figure out her next move." Alara wiped dirt from her hands. "Does she need help?" "She needs what you had," Mrs. Kowalski said. "People who believe her, people who'll fight for her. I thought maybe you'd want to talk to her." Alara found the woman sitting in Mrs. Kowalski's parlor, thin and scared and trying to be brave. Her name was Margaret, and her story was all too familiar. A controlling husband, false accusations of mental instability, the threat of being locked away. "I saw your case in the newspapers," Margaret said. "I saw that you won, that you got free. I thought maybe if you could do it, I could too." "You can," Alara said firmly. "And you're not alone. We'll help you." Over the next weeks, Alara found herself becoming something she'd never expected, an advocate. She connected Margaret with Catherine's law firm. She testified in front of the town council about the need for legal protections for women. She helped Sarah establish a small shelter at the church for women fleeing dangerous situations. It wasn't the quiet life she'd imagined, but it was meaningful in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Every woman she helped felt like another piece of justice, another small victory against the darkness she'd survived. One evening in May, Cade found her sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. "I was thinking about how different everything is from what I imagined," Alara said. 4 years ago, I thought we'd live quietly on this ranch, raise our son, grow old together, simple and peaceful. "And now?" Cade prompted. "Cade, now it's complicated and sometimes hard and definitely not quiet," Alara said. "But it's also more meaningful than I ever dreamed. The women we're helping, the changes we're making, it matters. It all matters." "You matter," Cade said firmly. "The work you're doing, the lives you're changing, it's incredible. But don't forget to save some energy for yourself, for us, for Finn." "I won't," Alara promised. "I've learned how to balance things, the hard way, but I've learned." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. From inside the house came the sound of Finn practicing his reading, his small voice carefully sounding out words. "Do you ever regret coming back?" Kate asked suddenly. "Taking on all of this instead of just running somewhere fresh where no one knows your story?" "Never," Alara said immediately. "This is my home, you and Finn, this ranch, this town, flawed as it is. This is where I belong. Running would have been easier, but it wouldn't have been living, and I'm done with just surviving. I want to live." As if summoned by their conversation, Finn burst out onto the porch. "Mama, Papa, come see what I drew." They followed him inside to find a picture on the kitchen table. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house, surrounded by flowers and animals. Above it, in Finn's careful printing, were the words, "My family." Alara picked it up, tears blurring her vision. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect." "That's us," Finn explained unnecessarily. "You and Papa and me. Together forever." "Together forever," Alara agreed, pulling him into a hug. That night, lying in bed with Cade's arm around her and Finn sleeping soundly down the hall, Alara finally allowed herself to believe it was real. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. The nightmares might never completely go away, and the scars would always be there. But they didn't define her anymore. In June, word came that Randolph Wynn had been sentenced to 25 years in prison. Alara felt nothing when she heard the news. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a kind of quiet closure. Her father had made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. She'd made her choices too, and they'd led her home. July brought a celebration that the whole town turned out for. 1 year since Alara had stepped off that train in a ruined wedding dress. 1 year since she'd started fighting to reclaim her life. To mark the anniversary, Pastor Williams organized a community dinner at the church. Alara almost declined, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. But Cade convinced her to go, and she was glad she did. The evening wasn't about celebrating her specifically. It was about celebrating all of them, the whole community that had learned to question their assumptions, to look beyond surface stories, to support women who needed help. Sarah gave a speech about the new medical practices Doc Morrison was implementing to protect patients' rights. Catherine, who'd traveled from Boston for the occasion, announced that 3 more states had passed laws making it harder to imprison women without proper medical cause. Margaret, who'd successfully divorced her husband and started a dressmaking business in town, thanked everyone who'd helped her find her courage. When they asked Alara to speak, she stood in front of the gathered crowd and said simply, "A year ago, I came home broken and afraid. You didn't have to believe me. You didn't have to help me. Some of you didn't at first, and I don't blame you for that. But enough of you did, and that made all the difference. This past year has taught me that healing isn't something you do alone. It's something we do together, as families, as communities. Thank you for being my community. Thank you for helping me heal." The applause was long and genuine. As Alara sat back down between Cade and Finn, she felt something she'd been reaching for all year finally settle into place. Peace. Not the absence of pain or struggle, but the acceptance that she could handle both and still thrive. August brought a letter that made Alara laugh and cry at the same time. It was from a women's college in Boston, inviting her to speak to their students about her experiences and the legal changes that had resulted. They were offering travel expenses and a generous honorarium. "You should do it," Cade said when she showed him the letter. "It's 3 weeks away," Alara protested. "The harvest will be starting soon, and we'll manage," Cade interrupted. "Alara, this is important. Your story is important. Besides," he grinned, "Finn and I could use some time to plan a surprise for you." "What kind of surprise?" Alara asked suspiciously. "The kind you'll find out when you get home," Cade said. "Now write them back and accept." The trip to Boston was both terrifying and exhilarating. Alara had never been that far east, never been in a city that large, never stood in front of a room full of educated young women hanging on her every word. But when she spoke about her experiences, about fighting back, about refusing to accept other people's definitions of who she was, she watched those young faces light up with understanding and determination. You've inspired them, the college president told her afterward. Half of them want to be lawyers now, fighting for women's rights. The other half want to be doctors, reforming medical practices. You've given them a vision of what's possible when women refuse to be silenced. On the train ride home, Elara thought about those eager young faces. They would change the world, those girls. They would make it better for their daughters and granddaughters. And she'd played a small part in that. When she finally arrived back in Briar Ridge, Cade and Finn were waiting at the station. Finn had grown in just 3 weeks, his face more mature somehow. He ran to her with his usual enthusiasm, chattering about everything she'd missed. "And Pop and I worked on the surprise every single day," Finn said. "You're going to love it, Mama. It's the best surprise ever." "Should I close my eyes?" Elara asked, amused. "Not yet," Cade said, taking her bag. "Wait until we get home." The drive back to the ranch was filled with Finn's non-stop commentary about the surprise, though he managed not to actually reveal what it was. When they finally pulled up to the house, Cade said, "Okay, now you can close your eyes." Elara obeyed, letting Cade guide her down from the wagon and across the yard. She could hear Finn bouncing with excitement beside her. "Okay," Cade said finally. "Open them." Elara opened her eyes and gasped. Behind the house, where there had been nothing but wild grass before, stood a beautiful garden. Not just any garden, but one filled with wildflowers of every color imaginable. Lupines and Indian paintbrush, columbines and wild roses, arranged in natural-looking clusters that seemed to have grown there forever. "We planted it while you were gone," Finn said proudly. "Papa said you told me about your mama and the wildflowers, and how she said people should be wild and free. So we made you a wildflower garden." Elara felt tears streaming down her face. She walked into the garden, touching the flowers gently, breathing in their scent. It was perfect, more perfect than anything she could have imagined. "There's more," Cade said softly. He led her to the center of the garden where a small bench sat beneath a young tree. On the bench was a carved wooden plaque that read, "Caroline's Garden, for the mothers who taught us to be wild and free." "You named it after my mother," Elara whispered. "She gave you life," Cade said. "She taught you to be strong, even if she didn't live long enough to see it." This seemed right. Elara turned and threw her arms around Cade, holding him as tight as she could. "Thank you," she managed through her tears. "Thank you so much." "I helped too," Finn announced, tugging on her skirt. "You absolutely did," Elara said, scooping him up into the hug. "This is the most wonderful surprise anyone has ever given me." That evening, after Finn was in bed, Elara and Cade sat in the wildflower garden watching the stars come out. The air smelled like summer and growing things and home. "I have something to tell you," Elara said. "I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it." Cade turned to look at her, his expression curious. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," Elara said. "I found out right before I left for Boston. I didn't want to tell you then because I didn't want you to worry while I was gone, but we're going to have another baby. Finn's going to be a big brother." Cade stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, joy and wonder and a little bit of fear all mixed together. "Are you sure? Is everything okay? Do you—" "I'm sure," Elara interrupted, laughing. "I saw Doc Morrison before I left. Everything's fine. Better than fine. I'm healthy, the baby's healthy, I'm due in March." "A spring baby," Cade said, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Elara, this is— I don't even have words." "I was terrified to tell you," Elara admitted. "After everything that happened with Finn, after they took him from me so soon, I was afraid you'd worry, afraid I'd worry too much, afraid of jinxing it somehow." "We'll worry together," Cade said firmly. "And we'll be excited together. And in March, we'll welcome our new baby together. The way it should have been with Finn." "The way it will be this time," Elara agreed. The news spread through town quickly, and the response was overwhelming. Women brought baby clothes they'd saved. Mrs. Kowalski knitted tiny blankets. Doc Morrison assured Elara that he'd deliver the baby himself and would make sure she had all the time she needed with her newborn afterward. Finn was ecstatic at the prospect of being a big brother. He asked daily about the baby, wanted to feel Elara's belly as it grew, insisted on helping set up the nursery. Cade was attentive to the point of being overprotective, making sure Elara rested enough, ate enough, didn't work too hard. I survived 4 years in an asylum, Alara reminded him, when he tried to stop her from mucking stalls in her 5th month. I think I can handle normal ranch work while pregnant. Humor me, Cade said. Let me take care of you. I didn't get to do it the first time. So Alara let him fuss, understanding that this was as much about healing his own wounds as protecting her. They were both learning to be parents together this time, partners in every sense. As autumn turned to winter and winter toward spring, Alara felt her body change and grow. This pregnancy was different from her first. She was older, more experienced, surrounded by support instead of facing it alone. She could plan for the baby's arrival instead of fearing it. In early March, a few weeks before her due date, Alara woke in the middle of the night to the now familiar sensation of contractions beginning. She lay still for a moment, breathing through them, assessing. Not urgent yet, but definitely labor. Cade, she said softly, shaking his shoulder. It's time. This time there was no panic, no terrified rush. Cade got up calmly, helped her dress, and went to wake Mrs. Kowalski, who'd agreed to stay in the guest room for the last few weeks. Mrs. Kowalski would watch Finn while they went to Doc Morrison's office. Papa? Finn appeared in his doorway, rubbing his eyes. Is the baby coming? The baby's coming, Alara confirmed, crossing to hug him. You're about to become a big brother. Will you be gone long? Finn asked, a hint of old fear in his voice. Not too long, Alara promised. And I'll be back soon, I promise, Finn. I'll always come back. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Doc Morrison and Sarah attended her, with Cade holding her hand through every contraction. As dawn broke over Briar Ridge, Alara felt the final overwhelming urge to push, and then suddenly there was crying, the most beautiful sound in the world. It's a girl, Doc Morrison announced, placing the baby on Alara's chest. A girl! Alara looked down at her daughter's tiny, perfect face and felt something inside her chest expand to the point of breaking. This baby, born free and safe, welcomed into a home full of love. She's beautiful, Cade breathed, tears streaming down his face. She looks just like you. She looks like herself, Alara corrected, stroking her daughter's soft cheek. Perfect and new and completely herself. They named her Caroline Grace. Caroline for Alara's mother, Grace for the gift she represented. When they brought her home later that day, Finn was waiting on the porch, bouncing with excitement. Can I see her? Can I hold her? He asked, trying to peek at the bundle in Alara's arms. Gently, Alara said, settling on the porch with Finn beside her. She adjusted Caroline so Finn could see her face. Meet your baby sister. Finn stared at the baby with wide, wondering eyes. Then he very carefully stroked her tiny hand with one finger. She's so small, he whispered. We have to protect her, right, Papa? We do, Kate agreed. That's what big brothers do, what families do. We protect each other. And we love each other, Finn added, even when things are hard. Especially when things are hard, Alara said, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. That night, with both children sleeping and the house quiet, Alara and Cade stood in Caroline's nursery watching her sleep. The room was filled with gifts from the community, evidence of how far they'd all come together. 5 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything, Alara said softly. My son, my husband, my freedom, my future. I thought I'd never be whole again. And now? Cade asked. Now I have more than I ever imagined, Alara said. Not just my family back, but a purpose, a community, a reason to keep fighting for what's right. She looked up at him. I'm not the same person who disappeared that night. I'm someone different now, someone stronger. Someone extraordinary, Cade corrected. You always were. You just had to survive hell to realize it. We survived it, Alara said. Together. Even when we were apart, we were surviving together, fighting to get back to each other. Cade pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long time, watching their daughter sleep, listening to Finn's soft breathing from down the hall, surrounded by the life they'd built from the ashes of tragedy. Outside, spring was arriving in Wyoming. The wildflowers in Caroline's garden would be blooming soon, wild and free and beautiful. The ranch would come alive with new calves and colts. The world would keep turning, bringing both challenges and joys. But here, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. A family whole and healing. A woman who'd fought her way back from the edge of despair and won. A man who'd learned that love meant believing, even when belief was hard. A little boy who'd gained both his parents, a baby girl born into freedom and possibility. This was what victory looked like. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and hard-won. And theirs. Elara had come home. Not just to a place, but to herself. To the life she'd always deserved, but had to fight to claim. And she would never take it for granted again. Years later, when Finn was grown and Caroline was heading off to college, people would still talk about Elara Mercer and the case that changed everything. They'd talk about the asylum that was shut down, the laws that were changed, the women who were freed. But Elara herself rarely spoke of those days anymore. Not because they weren't important, but because she'd moved beyond defining herself by what had been done to her. She was too busy living, loving, fighting for the causes she believed in, and watching her family thrive. On a November evening, much like the one when this story began, Elara sat on her porch with Cade beside her. Their hair was graying now, their hands weathered by years of work, but they still held each other the same way they had as newlyweds. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come back?" Cade asked. "If you'd just started over somewhere else?" "No," Elara said simply, "because I always knew I'd come back. There was never another option. This is home. Your home. Our family is home." She looked out at the ranch, at the wildflower garden now mature and lush, at the light glowing in the windows of the house where her children slept. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd survived for, right here in front of her. She'd been stolen from this life once. She'd fought her way back. And now, finally, irrevocably, she was free. Not because someone had given her permission or declared her sane or let her go, but because she'd claimed her freedom herself and refused to ever let it go again. The woman who'd returned from the dead had done more than survive. She'd thrived. She'd built something beautiful from the ruins of what had been taken from her. And she'd won. Completely, utterly, forever won.